going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
No more wars, no more disruptions. We will have prosperity and we will have peace. Under Trump, we will have no more wars, no more disruptions, and we will have prosperity and peace for all. I am the candidate of peace. I am peace.
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Monday, December 29th, 2024, 5. Interesting. 2025. Thank you for joining me today. I played that opening clip yesterday, but it definitely fit the conversation, but it fits far better with what we're going to discuss today, which is something we've discussed in a, more of an overview sense many, many times. Not just the Zionist influence on this, but to be clear, not the only influence on the war focus of this country and the government rather, but it's a very important point to see today. And it always is, this entire time we've been having this conversation, really, post October 7th with the awareness around what Zionism actually is. It's become more increasingly important with the development of global events. And this is an objective reality. And I mean that in the sense that it's not an opinion to state, like I went over yesterday, that the stated outwardly Zionist government of Israel, as they identify themselves, are objective, self-evident involved in what's going on. So to point out that involvement is not a contentious point, even though it's regarded as such, which is very revealing and very interesting. But today, really the latter half of the entire show, we're going to be focusing on not just all that I can point to, but all the ones relevant and taking place right now, from Nigeria to Venezuela to Ukraine to Syria to we're an overlap of South Africa. Many different examples we're going to talk about. Bombings taking place. It's obviously not a peace president. Neither was Biden. So it's not unique to Trump, but it's definitely about the lie that was told and the selling people on what, like we've been saying this entire administration, and it's been happening long before, but it really happened in a way I've never seen before post, 2025, just promising you what what we want, when never intending to deliver, which that's always happening, but rather with a planned, it feels like it might be what you're asking for, which is actually the exact opposite. And if you follow the show, you know what we're talking about. It's just a general, for example, if you guys haven't watched previous shows, offering to end the Fed, and then really with the plan to, and already doing so, rolling out a CBDC stablecoin dynamic. But today we're focusing on largely, like I said, the war focus element, but as it connects to the first parts we're going to get into, as we tend to connect, set up the show. And I've said in the past before, it's not always that everything we discuss connects. Today is one of those shows. And I always try to do this. I try to find the way that these things weave together and to show you that it's never just one individual thing, or rather rarely is like that. So today, what we're going to basically go over are a few major topics, but how they weave through that conversation of the war focus. We're going to talk about, to start, an interesting overlap of sort of I don't know what you would call it, but we talk about it quite often, but the idea of where you have, and this is Michael Flynn we're going to be discussing, General Flynn, and the framing of something that I disagree with as well, and saying this is so bad and we have to fight this, even though it's additional to that, it's exactly what Trump is doing and what Trump is saying. And I find that fascinating because they largely support Trump. Flynn and others, they've had their differences, but right now, and a lot of them around there are calling out what they're doing with vaccines, and, like I will as well, Ursula and the EU. And then ignoring the fact that Trump has said basically the same things, and overlapping that with the point of how all of this interconnects with people like Bill Gates, and how Bill Gates is completely tied in with the administration today. And on top of that, how Bill Gates is connected to Epstein, and that's not a problem for everybody else, but Epstein's discussion, which we'll get into, the overlap of how those connect and how it's such contradictory points, but also that Epstein, all the releases we've been covering, but also a recent one about a journalist going back to Miami Herald that did excellent work that really did break this story out, and turning out that she was being surveilled, which, by the way, I think accidentally, because that's why I call it a debacle, and what they're doing is embarrassing. And it's straight up incompetence as far as I can tell, releasing things in the Epstein release that show that they were surveilling a journalist in 2019. So it can't be argued it was it was during Trump's administration at the tail end of the last one, which means that when this was happening, way past when Epstein was being seen for what he is, they were surveilling the journalist who was making that scene. I really don't know how you can misunderstand that. I find that relevant. We'll connect that with a very important point that I feel is relevant to what I'm dealing with over here. May not be, as always, like could just be something I don't see, but the possibility that it's more nefarious is certainly there. And overlapping that with this conversation of the larger, interestingly overlap with Vault 7, which recently did a touch on, and how that's relevant to where we are now, overlapping that with AI, what's happening with XAI, what's happening with this transition, which has always been military focused, and what they're using that for and the information flow from that. And then overlapping that with what Israel's doing and the focus of Israel being the leader, the lead in AI, even though that's what Trump says the US is going to be doing. Maybe that's the same thing and they don't mean the US, and how that overlaps with the war focus. And we'll get into all the things we discussed today. Or I briefly started with the different locations, and some of you may not even know are happening. And it's important to understand Somaliland being one we recently touched on. That's going to be even more clear today. But let's start with a point that I just think is relevant to include. I'm showing you this view for a reason. I'll show you right now. The title originally, Charlie Kirk tops Google's year in search 2025 trending search list, which is interesting just the point alone. 2025, right? Now, clearly, that happened, the shooting and so on. But the point is, we're talking about all the way toward the tail end of the year right now. What's interesting to me is that clearly there was a surge because of the event. Now, that always happens. And this was a very, very serious, contentious, near global event, right? Just the way it was discussed. Whether you agree with that or not, that was the reality. Now, in this case, why is it still continually being searched to the point to where it somehow, after only halfway through, became the leading search in the entire year? It could just be because the assassination. That's possible. I tend to think it's because people are still talking about this, which is what they do not want. The entirety of the main conversation and the mainstream alternative, we're all telling you to stop talking about it. It's, clearly the divisions between people in the mainstream alternative right. I think it's because this story did not go the way they planned. And I think it's very obvious that whatever narrative we're being spun with Tyler Robinson still sort of just drifting in the background with not even a plea out yet. I think there's more to the story quite clearly. And I think this shows you that so too does everybody else think that, or it's a bad way to say that. I think the reason it's still being searched to this point is because everybody has questions. I think that's very positive and shows you that even within the partisanship, people aren't buying it, guys. I just think that's worth really reflecting on. Now, on the point of partisanship, and as this leads us into the larger conversation, Red Pill Dispenser puts this clip out. I'll play it first. EU leader Ursula von der Leyen announces a partnership with Bill Gates to vaccinate 500 million children by 2030. Now, technically, because we know how the partisanship loves to be accurate with their reporting, it's Gavi, not Bill Gates. And technically, Bill Gates is not even necessarily the leading part of Gavi anymore. But nonetheless, I do agree that that's relevant. And I will get into Bill Gates in particular. But it's just fun to point out how left and right, they're always so quick to blend it together when they want to make their point, but then criticize everybody else for being ridiculous. But here's the clip from the EU. And I too want to call this out. I think this is alarming.
A better world also means a healthier world. And vaccination is our best chance to do this. Vaccines have saved millions of lives in the past 50 years. But right now, millions of children are still at risk. They need vaccines. So we must continue to support vaccination around the world. And today, I am pleased to pledge $290 million for Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Each child should be protected. And more will come. Together with Gavi, we have the goal to vaccinate 500 million children by 2030.
Yes, and that's something we're all concerned about. Not just because you can argue that every single vaccination is bad. I have my very obvious concerns. I've highlighted many, many, many times. The point is that we can debate that all day long. I've also argued that there's, if like hypothetically speaking, if somebody you have good intentions decide to make a vaccination, they argue will help you. It's important to think about the tool versus the actors. But I argue with, like I've always said, with what we know about vaccination, and if what we know is correct, that's a big if based on all of the broken systems we exist in, then it's certainly possible that something could have a positive benefit, of course, if it's not being forced down your throat and you have the right to say no, and it's, the whole thing, and it's not being funded by taxpayers. The bottom line, that aside, I just feel it's always important to highlight that. I agree with the concern here, and I think this is an alarming thing to be going off of after what we just saw, especially since Gavi was absolutely involved with the COVID-19 conversation. Now, Michael Flynn says she hates your children. She is also unelected. She also sounds nuts. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, then explain this overlap for me. Trump dismisses COVID-19 vax safety claims, says he saved 100 million lives. Now, that's exactly what she just said. She literally just said, now this is specifically COVID vaccine, okay? That's important. But that's the most important discussion around people critical of vaccines. So that's important to overlap this with Trump. So over here, she's saying we saved all these lives with vaccines and that she's crazy and she's dangerous. And okay, here's Trump basically saying the same thing around the worst one that we know about. I find that very relevant. I also know that Donald Trump has been very buddy-buddy with Bill Gates in this recent administration, had multiple dinners with him. Here's just one from Fox. Bill Gates details dinner that left him impressed, said that Trump was very excited about what they were talking about. Now, to be clear, it's been largely adversary, or not, that's wrong, like an advisory role, but there's no provable money exchange. The point is, I think if there is more going on behind the scenes, that there's actual agreements and financial exchange, it would make sense to me that this would be something they don't want you all to see. But that doesn't mean it's happening. I just want to point that out because I think one thing, my gut tells me there's a lot going on in this administration that they're willfully keeping from most people's views because they know even their side isn't going to be happy with it. But we can only engage with what we can prove. So right now we know that they have met many, many times. And Trump has said good things about it many times. He's invited Bill Gates to many different events, including his inauguration. You can't ignore these things. On top of that, as even Grok will tell you, he's met in person at least 4 times with Bill Gates. And that's just in person. There's been other meetings he's been involved in. And I find that very relevant, as it says here about the vaccination conversation. We've gone over this before. So I think it's interesting that you can have him frame this like which I agree, she is a dangerous part of this conversation. But how does it, in a really material sense, differ from what Trump is doing? Now, saying things is one thing. Trump says a lot of different things that don't really add up to action. So what he's doing and what he said in many ways also aligns with exactly what she's saying. I find that very relevant, on top of the fact that he's also already done this once. Derek made this very excellent point that very few picked up on that got so much pushback because it was obviously correct. Even the Children's Health Defense platform posted it and then immediately took it back because they got so much criticism. But guess what? They later admitted that it was actually correct. It just shows you how people are swayed by partisanship, guys. And I still clearly support the Children's Health Defense efforts because they do good work today, despite them me having criticism in other ways as well. The point is that he very clearly manipulatively made it look like they pulled money from WHO, but then gave it all to Gavi, which was the second leading, I think at the time, funder of the WHO. And it was way more than before. So in essence, it was the same thing, but actually more funding. And on top of that, there was weird things around this in the very beginning of this administration as well, but it's more opinionated, so we'll leave it there. But my mind is that there's a lot of this still happening around the sides. Now, on top of that, as I've shown you many times, Trump and his administration has leaned into self-amplifying shots. Arcturus is one, the Amplitude, they have all these different self-amplifying COVID shots included. So still doing the same thing, still promoting them, even have the actual community shot right now being given and out there for 2025. Despite right now asking most Republicans, they'll tell you that's not true because Trump stopped it. They don't even look half the time. Partisans is my point. But this, I argue, is the same thing. Now, overview, on top of the fact that everything else we just said, let's not forget that in their continuing resolution, they included, as he says, just a reminder, both the Republican CR and the Democrat alternative will continue funding transgenic edible plant vaccines. Yes, that's also happening. And this is in it. We've talked about it already. And both sides want it because that's the point. I said, so apparently Ozempic, Bill Gates fake food, that's also part of it. And transgenic edible vaccines and even now COVID shots I just showed you are MAHA. Or is that just what the blind followers say? Speak up, conservatives. Show the nation that you are not what the two-party illusion pretends that you are. And I believe that. Now, we also had Alex Jones telling you in 2024 that he was going to, if we can keep Trump alive, he says, they're going to prosecute Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, Fauci, Hillary, the whole thing. I don't see that happening. Now, this is important to segue into what they're currently still doing with Kash Patel and the same thing. And Jones still screaming for them despite none of this actually happening, because you know why. And this video going all the way back to August 23rd, remember this? He's got some big announcements about people being arrested and all these big things happening. And he says, I don't say this unless I've got the big deal. And guess what? He was wrong. Because what happened was Comey and James and all the rest, even Bolton, by the way, seemed to have been nothing but a theater show. I still could be wrong. I guess we'll find out. But as it stands now, I am correct because of where they are. Both James and Comey, Bolton, I guess we'll find out. And I think it's incredible that we can still be at this point. So I'm trying to highlight this overlapping hypocrisy from the core of what they claim this all is. On top of that, guess what, guys? Breaking news. Donald Trump's administration unveils $2 billion in UN, United Nations, aid plan amid push for sweeping reforms. Now, to be clear, this is actually a large decrease from what was happening before. So if you want to try to make this a win, you can say, yes, he's cut the spending to the UN. And I would agree with that, except for the fact that that's not the way you guys told us this was going to go down. The argument was that the UN was the globalist evil thing that we're going to fight, and it's never, oh, now you're funding him for $2 billion. So you just have to be real about what this shows you. Now, you could argue the decrease is good. I agree with that. But I argue there's a ton happening around the UN, which is more important to their agenda. So it's the fact that they're still funding this, it's just hilarious to me. But overall, I think I've lost the highlighting. Either way, the point was simply U.S. has unveiled a $2 billion pledge for United Nations humanitarian operations. Think USAID, guys. It's the same damn stuff. A move that comes as the Trump administration heavily reduces foreign assistance. Well, you would agree, right? But when you overlap that with the massive war focus and spending on that, which is actually largely increased, then no, it's not really that much different. On top of the fact that they've spent a ton more in a general sense, even though we're supposed to be cutting costs and shrinking government, none of that's happening. And it says right there, while the $2 billion remains a substantial sum, it's far below historical levels. We have to make sure we include that point, because I'm not trying to suggest that this is, like I said, it's pretty clear. It is still funding it. I think that's the important point. But just wait. Watch and see how people cover this. I bet you Nick Sorter's out there going, yay, we did it. Even though it's completely the opposite of what we were told would happen. I just think this is so clear to the larger globalist kind of a discussion. Whatever you think that means, whatever you think this is the larger kind of global governance point, which is really what it's all about, is so obvious to me how that each one of these players are interconnected. But we're not really getting into that so much today. Now, on the overlap of this, arrests, right? I mean, everyone we were told, Fauci, Bill Gates, all of it. Epstein files, Social Security fraud. Okay, now fraud in Minnesota. Okay, great. Arrest people, man. Like, the idea somehow is always framed that people like us are just like, don't go after as if we're somehow on one side or the other. I want criminals to go to jail. I don't care whether they have a D or an R next to their name. I want criminals who you can prove broke the law go to jail. That hasn't happened, not for either side. Explain that for me, unless you understand. I mean, it's the reality. I was trying to frame that in a better way. It's the reality of the two-party illusion. It's right on the surface today. The White House account comes out and says massive fraud, Minnesota is finally being exposed. Probably. I mean, realistically, I think all of our state, local, our governments are corrupt because that's the way the system is currently run. So down to the smallest level, people are taking advantage because that's what seems to be the status quo. But whether or not there's a larger immigration, which is really what this is aimed at, and Elon, the Ilhan Omar and AOC, and they're going after, well, I guess more so, I'm forgetting the other one's name. Anyway, Ilhan Omar, one of them, trying to focus on their heritage and God, I'm blanking on her name all of a sudden. Anyway, it's actually not even relevant. I don't trust any of these politicians, but my point is they're aiming at them and going after their personal background, and, which I think they're probably corrupt like all of them. At the end of the day, the idea is not about that. If you think for 1 second this has to do with anything other than the larger agenda, I think you're missing the picture. That's my opinion. But here we are. So if nothing happens, what will you say about this? If nothing really changes and all it is an effort to frame it a certain way so they can get some kind of political momentum in important states, or they can manipulate certain immigration tactics in certain locations, or larger points that we get into every day, actually about foreign influence, about AI. There's lots of things going on. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what actually happens. The reality is what happened with the Terror attack on Halloween. Yeah, nothing. What happened with the shooting at the Dow? Nothing. What happened with Comey? And get all these huge events and cash is bringing it down? Nothing. Every single one of those has completely fallen flat. We don't even have a plea from Tyler Robinson. What happened with Trump's assassination? Are we even talking about that anymore? This is absurdly obvious. So I simply said, how many of these have you guys posted? How many arrests have happened? 0. Let me know when you guys actually arrest somebody. Until then, this is all noise that only your blind followers promote. Hashtag two-party illusion. Now here, this is what they posted on Truth Social from the immigration enforcement platform. ISIS boots on the ground in Minneapolis. Okay, so now you got more enforcement everywhere. We're going to get into the end again about the deployment of more troops all around the country, because I guess that's what freedom looks like. And this is just more of the same. The same people who have been caught repeatedly, more than I've ever seen in my life, breaking the law. No warrants, no identification, shooting people who they lie about because they drove away or because they insulted them, arresting people because they said the wrong thing, arresting people because they have an old traffic ticket, just insane levels of dishonesty, and shooting at families and cars because they don't do what they're told. These are monsters. There's really no other way to frame that, guys. The guy who shot that woman, who said he shot 5 times, had 7 holes, and bragged about it all over this all came out in court. They lied about her having a gun, and they shot her anyway. They laughed about it. As far as I can tell, nothing happened. This is insane to me that we're acting like this is anything other than what we know is going on. Well, I guess I shouldn't say it like that I think is obvious. But this is about inspecting fraud sites. So inevitably, if there's nothing that actually happens other than big talk and narrative and breaking down networks, but nothing truly happens, maybe save for some random unknown, nameless individuals, then this is nothing but a deception. Now, same point, the same post. And I'll overlap this with this post. Kash Patel comes out, and this was on the 21st, I believe, or before that. And this is Kash Patel saying, I'll read what I wrote. Big talk from Kash Patel in this recent video below about going after anyone who, quote, wishes to do harm to our way of life and our citizens, here or abroad. Well, after 4 Americans were killed by Israel, that was here this was September 21st, 4 U.S. citizens killed, including 3 children, in an Israeli strike in Lebanon. The point was, after they were killed, let's see if this was just bluster or big talk like the rest of what he's shown. Well, the answer is in the proof's in the pudding, as it said, because now nothing has happened. Nothing continues to happen. Not anywhere, mind you. Now, in this conversation, I find it interestingly overlap with Pam Bondi and the criticism about Pam Bondi in these type of investigations, in all of it. Because I'm overlapping this with the Comey and James and all of it. So what I find I guess just insulting, but just what I've been trying to show you about what leaders do and do not do. Chris Martenson rips them apart. Donald Trump posted this. Now, like I've said 100 times, and like anybody knows, if a good leader is responsible for its team, it doesn't matter whether you're the one that did it. It doesn't matter whether they didn't follow your orders. You stand up and you go, I take responsibility for what happened. I mean, you can feel free to let the details come out that ultimately this order was given that wasn't followed, but it's my responsibility. That's what a leader does, not this. This is pathetic, and I agree with what Chris said. Trump wrote Pam, which how long have we been telling you that her or Kash are about ones that are the first to get kicked off the ship or under the bus if that happens? I have reviewed over 30 statements he writes and posts. Great. So Trump is looking at what random people say online. Great job. That's why he falls for anything, it seems. Saying essentially, same old story as last time. All talk, no action. Nothing is being done, he writes. What about Comey, Adam, Schiff, Letitia? Exactly. They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done. Then we almost put a Democrat-supported U.S. attorney in Virginia because Democrats are evil and bad across the board, right? I mean, you can't hide the narrative. They always try to act like, no, we're just talking about the bad ones. No, it's just the bad Hamas, not all Palestinians. And then literally everything they say is every one of them are bad. They're all terrorists. Democrats are activist terrorist monsters. All of them are, it's ridiculous to say that the entirety of everybody who ever said they're a Democrat this is the kind of stupid, lowbrow, lowest common denominator propaganda that is influencing far too many people, but I don't think it's the majority. But this is the leadership, if you can even use that term. And please, for those may just tuning in, do not take this as a Trump, Republican. It's about our government. All of it, left and right, they're the same thing. And he says, a woke rhino who is never going to do his job. Right, so a bad Republican. So you see, the point is, anyway, I don't want to go too far on all the new minutia of it, but the funny thing, Rhino, it's anyone that doesn't blindly follow the team order. And it seems to be Israel giving those orders today. He says that's why 2 of the worst Dem senators pushed him so hard. He even lied to the media and said he quit and that we had no case. That's exactly what happened, by the way. You can quite literally prove that. And it says, no, I fired him and there's a great case. What a coward. This is the kind of guy that somebody quits and goes, no, you're fired instead. That's a weak person. I've been saying this the entire time. And he goes, I fired him. He said, and many lawyers, legal pundits say so. Okay, get this, right? It's a great case because other people I like who told me what I want to hear, even though the case has now fallen flat. Imagine posting this when already the case has been dismissed. Did he miss that? This is complete desperate narrative management. The Comey case has been dismissed because there's nothing there. And on top of the fact that the first guy who quit, like he's trying to claim he fired, said there's nothing there. I can't defend this. He got moved out of the way. He removed himself and then Trump claimed he was fired. And now they went at it again. Abba is now removed out of the way and there's nothing there and the case is gone. I mean, it's just pathetic. And it says, Lindsay is a really good lawyer. He likes you a lot. We can't deny any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served. Okay. The last part seemed to suggest that, look, do it back to them. They did it to me, so do it back because that's honest, right? That's transparent, isn't it? As Chris says, gosh, if only Trump had some sort of power over Bondi, some action he could take. But I guess all he can do is complain on social media like the rest of us. FYI, this is beyond weak and lame and shameful, he says. I've been saying this the entire time about the idea that he keeps acting like he's somehow independent of it all. I'm just an outside third party expressing my thoughts. No, you're the literal you are in charge of all of this. If Bondi's not doing something, it's your fault. I mean, the idea that you scream this out online only says one thing. You are trying to make the blame on her and remove yourself from the responsibility, which is weak and lame and shameful. I agree. So you can look at my show all the way back on October 10th, The Illusion of Comey James Indictments, and this was well before they had been dismissed. I mean, I often want to point out, demonstrating our value, just how many times we cover these things, not because I'm guessing, but because I'm looking at the facts, I'm looking at the precedents, and I'm not letting partisanship blind me to certain things. And I could see right then, because not this said or they said, because the data showed that there was nothing there. And so I remember what I said. Well, maybe something comes along and changes the story. But at the time I said, it looks like this will be dismissed. And boom, what do you know? And still, we get the Joneses out there and the Tuckers and the ones that are consuming the conversation while trying to force you back into one thing or the other, guys. And look what I said in the picture. They're not buying it. Which is exactly what's happening. They're not buying it. Brett Tolman, who is the executive director of Right on Crime, former U.S. attorney, he says the attacks on Pam Bondi are ridiculous from Trump. You understand? That's where it started. And says she's doing the absolute impossible. If you knew DOJ like I did, you would be cheering her tenacity and fierce determination. That's just embarrassing. I just simply did the old cheerleading post because that's what they're doing. It's look, you can argue that she's had roadblocks, but there's been 1,000 examples of her blindly towing the line when an honest person with integrity or just somebody who wants to actually do the right thing would have pointed these things out. Her, Noam, Hegseth, the whole damn team, guys. And I think you know why that is. And I also point out, this is just a post from a while ago. This woman says, some on the right are a fickle and disloyal bunch, right? Because loyalty is what freedom and liberty is all about. And she says, President Trump has given everything and is 100% loyal to the American people. Do I even need to comment on that? The only thing he expects is loyalty. I mean, it's just insane. This is what she actually thinks is what a free society acts like. After a decade, why do people still understand this concept? How wild is that? And I said, yeah, that's it, guys. Just blind loyalty. That's all he asks. No big deal. So do these people recognize how hypocritical they are? Nothing America first about loyalty to one person. As this famous Republican said, Theodore Roosevelt, to announce that there must be no criticism of the president or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but it is morally treasonable to the American people. But I guess they don't care about those things anymore. They care about their illusion of what's supposed to be happening. Now, Chris Martinson pointed this out, as we read already. Andrew Huff responds by saying it's theater. Just again, what he said was, if only Trump had some power over the situation, and basically said he's just being weak. He says it's theater and Trump wants it this way. It's a good cop, bad cop like routine. He blames all of the employees, all of his employees, for the bad optics of what he's telling them to do or not do. I actually agree with that. And Chris says that tactic has worn thin with me and many others, I suspect. Guys, everybody is tired of this. What's interesting, though, is down here, somebody responds by saying, oh, maybe it got pulled away. Oh, well. They just got drowned out, probably because it was an irrelevant comment that you'd want to read. Those things, Twitter doesn't like those kind of comments. But the point was somebody was basically saying, like, look, that Trump has failed at everything he's done so far. And even Huff goes, I disagree with that. I think because most of these people were large Trump supporters, if not entirely. And even they are starting to call this stuff out. You could take that for what it is. I think it's worth noting the people that were screaming down people's throats like us in the beginning as we were calling this stuff out, but doesn't mean they were dishonest about it. Maybe they were just snowed. It's worth acknowledging that. If I were in that position, I'd be like, I missed it. I was wrong. Now I see it. Very few of them are doing that. The ones that do deserve your respect. Now, this is, what's her name? I forget her name. It's AAGH, Garment Dillon, Civil Rights, Justice Department, serving under Pam Bondi. So she works at the Justice Department. She says, Trump, Bondi, DOJ is working to bring to justice those who weaponized the January 6th. Right, that's what we're really like. I agree, by the way, but it's funny to me that they just love to go like, what is it? Immigration, Muslims, censorship, but only in Europe, like the January 6th, a stolen election. Like this is the go-tos to get the certain people distracted with the same old story that I also agree in most cases are relevant, but guess what? They never, ever amount to anything. How many times are we going to talk about January 6th and Pelosi? I've seen Stephen Miller and Bondi and Hegseth post about Pelosi and January 6th and she's going down. Obama's treasonous and should go to jail. Anybody? Are you seeing them go? I mean, it's almost not even worth bringing up anymore because I don't believe anybody even remotely honest pretends that that's what they're lying to you. I don't know how else to frame that. So she's going, yeah, January 6th, we're going to get them. Well, is there somehow new evidence you're breaking down? We have the evidence. They already got shown to break the law. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, this thing's closer than usual because I have to scoot this forward. The point, though, is that clearly it's already there. And if they wanted to, they could do something. I don't believe they want to because I think it's all one team and you're not on it. And so this person says, oh, and this is Gunther Eagleman saying, Dear Bondi, please do not let the statute of limitations run out on January 6th. Yeah, good point. The fact that people like Eagleman are still actually like, please do the thing that you continually fail to do shows you either a shocking level of naivety or somebody who is on the team. She also says, my boss, Bondi, works around the clock to bring justice for all Americans. Don't be a hater and simp for weaponized online disinformation. Really? Don't hate her for not doing her job. Just pretend it's all going to work out. Well, as this person says, 0 arrests, Russian collusion, January 6th, Mar-a-Lago raid, Biden auto pen, 2020 election, Epstein pedophiles, COVID, Benghazi, Doge file, Ukraine, on and on and on. Nothing. I mean, it's a wild to me that point doesn't, it's a mic drop, guys. There's just no way around it. Then Danya simply points out Senator Corbyn saying there must be consequences for this massive fraud in Minnesota. Well, if you prove the fraud, I agree. She says, ooh, look at the outrage. So when are people getting arrested? I mean, it's a point that everybody seems to be making. I agree. Like, I'm tired of hearing these new things and we broke the story. How about you start reporting on these things when you actually have evidence or people arrested? And wokeness even says, remember, and wokeness, guys, like some of the most ardent, blind team sport politics, one-sided players. She says, it's now been over a week since Bondi, their 8 a.m. deadline on the Epstein documents. Any update? Well, the only update I know is that's breaking the law, but you guys don't want to frame it that way. There's no extension. They broke the law by not releasing this. We're going to get into Epstein next. But you love how they frame that, right? That's the best kind of criticism you're going to get, and it's not even really criticism. It's like, almost done, guys? Can you hurry up for us? Sarah says, more importantly, there have been 0 arrests made. Right, exactly. The only point that they'll never address. Or not only point, but now back to Bill Gates. Starting with the point from vaccination and everything else, Gates being, swirling around Donald Trump's inner circle like all the rest of the globalist technocrats. Bill Gates met with Jeffrey Epstein many times. I just think it's funny how it seems like everybody who is connected to Epstein are the people that are tied to Trump's administration, or all of them for that matter, and that they seem to be the ones that are not being focused on. They're talking about Epstein. Thomas Massey says, Bondi, and this is on the 28th, Bondi's most egregious violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act is not that she ignores the deadline, but that is also a crime, by the way. It's that she's redacting names of accused sex offenders. Really digest that for a second. and internal communications about decisions, wrongly citing old rules that are overridden by new laws. I mean, this is like Kash Patel claiming he's not allowed to discuss certain things because of some block that only applied to Florida that Massey pointed out that was not even, I mean, they're drowning in their lies. And this is why they hate him right now. That's why Trump calls Massey every bad name in the book, and most Republicans seem to support him right now. It's just self-evident. They're breaking the law by not releasing it. And the fact that, one, Trump's name is listed 600 times on top, and which just doesn't prove he broke the law, but it's relevant. And that they tried to hide it is relevant. On top of the fact that the victim, one of the victim's names was actually released, I think, from incompetence in their effort to hide Trump's name, but they put her name out. And they made the whole point about victims need to be protected and then did that. Clearly, they care about what they claim, right? No, this is a straight up cover up. I think most people already know that. And they're lying about why they're even covering up. But again, lastly, redacting the names of actual sex offenders. Is anyone going to explain that for me? Is it an FBI source? Well, that makes it all the more relevant to me. On top of that, after Trump DOJ suddenly finds 1 million Epstein documents. Now, what's hilarious to me, guys, this is today. What's crazy about this is after the previous release, and and there was this whole middle ground like they've done twice already where they go, oh, that's it. Oh, wait, no, we found 1 million more. And now I think the whole reason they did this is to try to create some kind of a narrative, which would not hold up in a legal sense, but they don't seem to care about that. That's why they had to, the deadline didn't work because we just found them. Oops. 1 million documents were in my shoe. I didn't even know. I'm sorry. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, this is how dumb they think we are. I think we're better said how stupid they are. I don't think they even realize half the time how blatantly just transparent they're being. Fines 1 million Jeffrey Epstein documents. Says the Justice Department is facing a renewed scrutiny after revealing that more than 1 million additional documents. That's just so ridiculous on his face. Tied to the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein have been discovered. So what does that even mean? After all this time, were they in a file cabinet somewhere? Like, what, discovered? I'll stop making the point. I just think it's so hilarious to me that they think this actually would fly. Significantly delaying the full release of records. That's what the argument comes down to. That's why we couldn't release it. They're covering up as fast as they can, in my opinion. The announcement came on Wednesday when the department confirmed that the newly uncovered materials were identified by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office for Southern District of New York. The disclosure means the public will have to wait a few weeks longer for the full release, despite a December 19th deadline. No, a legal requirement set under the transparency law passed last month. What was I going to say there? Confirmed the newly uncovered materials were identified. Yeah, no, there's something I was going to say and I lost it. That's why I tend to jump in if I lose it. But either way, I just think this is worth laughing about how desperate they are to try to make this out to be some kind of a random new thing. I mean, right now, it's already been proven what they're doing with what they've already put out. So this is, that was what I was going to say, is that right now, you have to recognize that, the title, for example, where it says, Democrats call it outrageous and illegal. If you really look at the big picture, do you really think that if they genuinely wanted to make a case about this, they could put people in prison right now? Because they've on the face of this broken the law already. There's no calls for criminal activity, action. There's no impeachment. Why is that, guys? Because just like them going, we're going after James and Comey and it's all coming down, the Democrats are going, we're going to get them for the Epstein files, and none of them want that to happen. That's my opinion. But if you look at the outcome, as always, not the narrative, not the statements, but what they're doing, they have 100 things they could use to bring down Trump. But they do every time. They had things they could do to bring down Biden. Didn't do that. They love to make it look like that because at the end of the day, I truly believe that these people, whether they actually hate each other or not, are not fighting each other. So it goes on. Quote, we have lawyers working around the clock to review and make the legally required redactions to protect victims. Other than ones we stumble over and forget about. Clearly, I don't believe that's what they're doing. But more redactions are not what people are demanding. Failing to meet its legal obligations is important. That's without the deadline they missed. It's outrageous, he says, that the DOJ has illegally withheld over 1 million documents from the public. Of course, they're going to go, we didn't know they were there. Good luck trying to make sense of that. Setbacks have plagued the Epstein document release since it began. Initial batches of records were posted online, then removed, and then reposted after concerns arose about redactions. Talk about incompetence, guys. It's just embarrassing. And the potential exposure of victims' identities. Some files contained photographs and references that raised concerns and prompted criticism before being removed. Like they're just like skating along. They oops, take that down. Wait, put it back up. Delete that. Oops. It's like these people are, I mean, if any one of these points must be able to show you that these people are very, like I've said, out of their depth, but I think it's more than that. I think this shows you a desperation on the surface of this, that they're just maybe trying to overwhelm you with certain things and then process of like not doing what they should have. I also think it's probably because Trump's team is just going, get it done, driving people who are, out of their depth already. And so they're just going to rush and do whatever Trump needs because he's going to yell at me more. And ultimately they end up making the problem that he yells at him for. That's just my personal opinion, but I think it really does line up with what we're seeing. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, as you guys have seen, has continued to just completely call out Trump. I'm going to start with the point that's at the end because I want you to think about it as we read this. Whatever she ends up doing in regard to Congress or a presidential run, whatever, I don't think she stated that. I think it was kind of discussed, but I think she said no. The point is whether she drops out of Congress or maybe runs again or chooses to run for president or anything else, I think that will say a ton to me. That will mean a lot to whether or not this whole thing is theater. The point I'm saying that for is that she's really criticizing Trump in ways that are damaging. But when you consider the bigger picture, it very well may be that this is just the counterbalance meant to give you her support, which we saw with tons of people. We saw with Gabbard. We saw with even Trump to a degree, Musk, or what's another good example? Just where they come out playing the counterbalance, then ultimately they just fall right back into line. So it says, the latest batch of Epstein-related records, the material includes multiple references to Trump, which we already talked about. I think it was something like over 600 when you include the space after his name. That was the other thing, by the way. The redactions in the actual things they put out, which is one of the reasons I think they were pulling it back and forth. You could just copy the redacted part, post it on a notepad, and it would show you what it said. And it turns out that's actually a vulnerability in some of these programs, and they're just incompetent. They didn't know that would happen. I just think it's hilarious, guys. I don't think you can deny anymore that they're just making mistakes at this point. And it says, this is horrifying. Marjorie Taylor Greene wrote, Trump called me a traitor for fighting him to release the Epstein files and standing with women who were raped, jailed in stalls, and trafficked to men, because they stood out in that big conference and there was a person with a sign that said Trump is a rapist or something, and as if she could control that. And then they just went after her like, you're standing with a bunch of terrorist Democrats, just childish stuff. It says Greene highlighted testimony from one Epstein victim who said she was, quote, kept in a stall and evaluated based on her appearance by Epstein and other men. In her post, Greene argued that withholding the records amounts to shielding perpetrators. It is, guys. Only evil people, she said, quote, only evil people would hide this and protect those who participated. Adding, I pray for these women. Greene, once a staunch Trump ally, has recently broken with him on the push to make the Epstein records public, at times joining Democrats in calling for their release. She announced last month that she plans to resign from Congress. Okay. So again, whether she does or not will say a lot to me. Now, it also won't prove that what she says is dishonest, but I just think that, a lot of times you get this sort of like, I'm leaving and then, I'm not running for president, but then you do. Like, it's how they tend to play this. So I'm hoping that she's being real. I have from the very beginning, but I'm going to be critical like we all should. But interesting, isn't it? I tend to think personally, just from my own personal opinion about this, there's always a lot going on. That's why I question that she might be doing something different. It could be a larger play. But at the core of this, I think it's just Occam's razor. I think it makes sense that Trump just seems to burn bridges faster than he can make them when somebody just goes against him. And in this case, she was a diehard supporter of him in ways that were very evident. And then she just took a certain line he didn't like, and then he just went to town. And it seemed from there, it just continued to evolve. I think that might just be what an organic event. It's hard to say, but always consider that it could be coordinated some way. But I think we saw that with a lot of people, where suddenly they just go, well, I disagree. Oh, you're a hater, rhino, because you have a different opinion. That's honest. People see that. Now, let's not forget, by the way, with the Maxwell overlap, that they granted her limited immunity already based on their proffer agreement, where she won't be held accountable for whatever gets divulged from her, which means everything else. You know what I mean? Like, whatever comes out, she ultimately has spoken with them. And I believe that she is likely going to be released at some point or pardoned. I really do. It's going to probably happen at some point quietly. Certainly could be wrong in some way, but I think that's what the evidence points to, like we've said in the past. Now, this article, Epstein files raise alarms after a reporter who exposed case finds her flight records included. Now, I find this wildly important today. Not just because we already, I mean, we know they're surveilling journalists, guys. We know that. It's been proven 100 times over. Left and right, foreign governments, through our government. It's very clear. The reason this is so important is because of how it happened around the Epstein files, and that it shows you that Trump's administration was the one trying to investigate, or rather just surveilling her. And then I'm going to overlap this with where we're going with the points of potentially what I'm dealing with on my side, the idea of what we're dealing with, the AI explosion through the military, through XAI and the rest, and how this has always been the point. So as we're on Twitter, we're basically just giving them information to control our lives. Article reads, investigative journalist Julie K. Brown, who we've mentioned before, from Miami Herald, whose reporting helped bring renewed scrutiny to Jeffrey Epstein, revealed this week that her own personal travel records appear in a batch of recently released Epstein-related documents. That couldn't have been on purpose, guys, because that's a really bad thing. There's no way to ignore that. I mean, there's one possible thing, and I'm going to we'll get to it in a second. I just don't think there's merit to it. I think I'll show you how we get there, about whether it was an accidental overlap. It says Brown, a longtime reporter for the Miami Herald, shared images on social media, which I'll show you in a second, showing American Airlines booking records tied to her name, including flights dated July 6th and July 8th, 2019. Epstein was arrested on federal sex trafficking charges on July 6th. Now, that's relevant because 2 days after this, he's being arrested for what we know. And 2 days later, they're still looking into her. I think that speaks for itself. The documents marked confidential for official use only, list passenger details, including Brown's maiden name, phone numbers. So that alone is basically doxing. And it says seat requests and flight segments. The records appear to be attached to materials produced in response to a grand jury subpoena and were among thousands of pages recently made public by the U.S. Department of Justice as part of an ongoing release of Epstein-related records. Now, for example, though, if her phone number was publicly posted somewhere, then I would argue that there's, I mean, it's usually more like an address. But if none of that was public, that's doxing. But I argue it's an accident anyway. But let's just say your number wasn't public, then that would meet that level, in my opinion. It says, in a post on Twitter, Brown questioned why her travel information was collected and preserved in the Epstein files. That's the second part of it. Not just collected, but then held and maintained. So that arguably wouldn't be necessary if it was what they're going to say next. And it says, she asked whether the DOJ had been monitoring her movements while she was actively reporting on the case. I mean, that's what happened. There's no way around that. It says she noted that her journalism had exposed Epstein's 2008 non-prosecution agreement in Florida, which was very uncomfortable for them because it was the agreement, the sweetheart deal through Acosta. Very important, guys. And it says, and helped to trigger the federal investigation that led to his arrest more than a decade later. And Acosta himself said that he was connected to intelligence, told to back off. Trump interviewed him before he was on Trump's first administration and asked him point blank. And he answered saying, hey, they told me to back away because it was like above my pay grade. That's paraphrasing. And apparently that was okay for them and they brought him on the team. Think about that. And think about what that shows you. They want, not talking heads, but people that are willing, like we've seen, willing to lie for whatever Trump wants, willing to ignore the rules for what Trump wants, willing to stand back from what's right, what's legal, what's, the law because it's above my pay grade. That's the kind of people we're working with. That's dishonesty. That's criminal. It says the DOJ has not publicly explained why Brown's flight records were included in the document set, and no evidence has been released indicating she was the target of an investigation. Legal experts have noted that broad subpoenas can capture incidental third-party records during criminal inquiries, particularly when investigators are reconstructing timelines, travel patterns, witness movements. Does that really make sense to you? Now, it's certainly possible. Maybe with additional information that we don't have, that maybe, somehow she overlapped with something where that got pulled in. But just with what we know right now and what we have in front of us, how in the world would her personal travel somehow be pulled in incidental third-party records to a criminal investigation, unless she was being surveilled and investigated? Again, something new could pop up tomorrow that might add more. But right now, I don't see how you get away from that. They were surveilling her because she was breaking something down about somebody who worked with the CIA and Mossad. That's what I think this is really about. And that's why it's relevant today, guys, because it's still what's going on. Brown's discovery has fueled... Wait, did I miss a part? No, okay. Brown's discovery has fueled renewed debate over the government's handling of the Epstein document release, which has drawn criticism for extensive redactions and the absence of certain materials, including victim interviews. grand jury testimony. You understand, guys, these are not things that you would pull back because of other, covering up victims' names. Victim interviews, which are already public, are not being included, or other things that are basically already acknowledged but not been fully released, are just being held back. But I guess they just found them in a million documents in their shoe, right? That's what's going on here. Major important information. Survivors, advocates, and transparency groups have argued the disclosures remain incomplete and overly opaque. These are the people who are the victims here. And they're telling you this isn't going, what they're doing is wrong. They're telling you they're hiding information. But I would imagine that's pretty clear by now. The revelation also echoes past concerns about press freedom. During the Trump administration, the DOJ, this is the first administration, the DOJ secretly obtained communication records from reporters at several major news organizations. Actions later acknowledged by the department were widely criticized. I mean, so this, first of all, not unique to Trump. This has been going on a long time. Left, right, our government, it's pretty clear. But it's very clear to see that this is something that they're willing to do and even criticized for, and they didn't even slow down, which is just what our government's done as far as far back as I can look. Now, I'll just include this again. You can watch the video. I've shared it a couple times in the recent shows. Former CIA officer John Kirikow, he says, one, that there's over 187 Mossad agents that are unregistered across the United States that they know about, but they don't demand that they ever register themselves. And that Jeffrey Epstein was, quote, absolutely, positively working for Mossad. Again, you know this already. If you've read, anything information we've talked about, you already know this. But it's important to recognize that it's the fact that he can express it so unequivocally. It's the evidence shows this. So think about that as it connects to the larger story today and what that might have been done for, and whether his sexual blackmail network might have, I don't know, possibly been used to coerce politicians to do certain things. I don't know. It's crazy, right? So this is important. Julie K. Brown. Pretty sure. Yeah. See, I knew I was already following her. This stupid platform. It says, does somebody at the DOJ want to tell me why my American Airlines booking information and flights in July 2019 are part of the Epstein files attached to a grand jury subpoena, as the flight itinerary includes my maiden name, and I did book this flight? Why was the DOJ monitoring me? Interesting. Melanie Argio says, the fact that Trump's DOJ was covering up the Epstein files and tracking the journalists reporting on them should tell you everything you need to know about who they are protecting. I think that's exactly right. And I'm not making it just about Trump or the Republicans, but this is where we are, guys. Now, overlapping this, and we'll continue to cover what happens around all of this stuff. This is really important. And I think I'm going to play this clip. This guy, now these are all, I'm not a fan of the TikTok head in the screen pointing back with no source material, but almost every point within this we've covered in the past, and almost every one of them you can prove. So it's just really about information. Like I include the WikiLeaks Vault 7 page, which we just recently went over, which will show you almost all of this. The point, though, is that this is real, but please do not take my word for it. Do your due diligence. But I just wanted to make this something we overlapped. And the point is that all of these different things are done by, well, really, I think a lot of different actors, but governments, and how they are used to create the illusion of security and privacy while they have access to everything. And there is no larger culprit in this field than the United States and Israel. And they are doing this to everybody, guys. And I want you to think about this as it relates to what we're dealing with. As I simply said, seems relevant at the moment.
Yo, what's poppin', everybody? I'm not suicidal. Anyways, I have a question game for you. A what-if question game. What if the CIA, not hackers, the CIA, developed malware that can remotely hijack modern smart cars control systems? And what if those weird accidents we kept seeing on TV weren't actually accidents? What if your smart TV, your Alexa, and the devices that you put in your homes are not actually off when they're supposedly off? Well, the CIA developed malware that makes Samsung TVs look powered down when they're actually on. What if the NSA deliberately sabotaged math formulas that were created to scramble and protect all encryption that's used today? And what if they did it by forcing manufacturers to backdoor the actual random number generators themselves, making them crackable by the NSA? And what if the cryptographers were warning people that these random number generators had a backdoor? That's a crazy what if, right? What if the FBI was distributing viruses and keyloggers on American computers to spy on them?
And just to be clear, for those listening on the podcast, he's saying what if, but this is why I hate these TikTok. He's pointing to things on the screen behind him that are referencing, whether it's an article or Wikipedia or whatever. My point is, listen to each one of these claims and look into it. You'll find lots of information that just is never regarded by or engaged with by the mainstream or mainstream alternative media.
And mainstream antivirus softwares were legally not allowed to detect them? Keyloggers on American computers to spy on them? And mainstream antivirus softwares were legally not allowed to detect them? That's a crazy what if. What if Intel and AMD, the microchip manufacturers, were forced to build secret processors into every single CPU that they manufacture, backdoors within the machines themselves that are below your operating system every time it boots up, and they can let the intelligence agencies access your computer even when it's turned off, as long as there's electricity running. But don't worry, this is probably just for the people that they deem persons of interest. So the NSA actually did have an entire team, possibly named the TAO team, whose job it was to intercept laptops, phones, electronics that you order online, to open the physical packages, install malware chips, bugs on the devices, to all people they deemed people of interest. Here's actual WikiLeaks documentation, 2013, of NSA spy tools that they were using to bug devices before they arrived at their destination. Oh wait, I forgot to say what if on that last one. So here's what keeps me up at night, guys. All of these leaked CIA programs, Magic Lantern, Operation Weeping Angel, leaked NSA documents, Ant Catalog, the TAO team, if this was happening 10, 15 years ago and we're only finding out about it pretty recently, what are they doing today that we're going to learn about 10 years from now? Have a great day, all of my persons of interest out there.
Yeah, it's a good video. I think at the end of the day, he's right. I mean, that's something we've made a point about a lot, right? The military, for example, like when you find, look at this new thing we're doing, they've probably been using it and testing it on you for about 20 years. And it's not exact, but it's pretty good marker to look back on. And so I agree. I mean, think about all this stuff. It's very, very clear, right? All of this stuff is being built with a presentation of security and privacy, when being built into it is the exact opposite. So it's an illusion. It always has been. Not because we don't want those things, but because they know we do. And so they want to promise what we want while selling us something else. Exactly what we're talking about. This administration is doing it everywhere. But so it's really important to think about in the overlap there. And I think it's relevant to what we're probably dealing with at this point. Now, I think it's also relevant to consider this. And I just had to randomly grab this because I somehow couldn't. I know I have it saved, but I couldn't find it right now. And I just want to point out, I hate when people add their logo over video that wasn't theirs, that he didn't do anything to. It just frustrates the hell out of me. But so forgive me for that part. But listen to what the Mossad chief said. Yes, the same video. The reality of what they're telling you, that we have manipulated devices in every country around the world.
Any surprises in Gaza?
Surprises?
Yeah.
You mean intelligence surprises?
Pages, walkie-talkies. You know how many treated equipment do we have in these countries? You don't. I do.
You mean you mean booby-trapped equipment?
Not only booby-trapped.
And spying.
Manipulated equipment. All right?
In which countries are you talking about?
All the countries that you can imagine.
That's just again, the fact that he has the nerve to say that just blows me away. I think there's a point. I think it's a threat. It's like Netanyahu saying off the back of the point about weapons, which again, watch the clip. So when we make weapons and this and this, you have a phone in your pocket, you've got a piece of Israel in your pocket, and then goes on another point. You're in the conversation of weapons. How does that not add up to what we know these things are all really about? That's 250 U.S. congressmen and women sitting in front of him at the 50 States One Israel conference in Israel. And that's exactly how he said it. Now, I could be wrong. Of course, that's always possible. But my God, if we can't put these things together at this point, and all the different ways that was built together, and Israel and the United States being like the leaders in these fields, Israel by far in the spyware field, which is most of what they're talking about. And now the AI overlap as well. We're going to get into where, Trump, we're going to be the leader in AI. Now, does we mean Israel? Because that seems to be where this is going. And we'll talk about that. But first, I already said, I'm just to include, it's worth going back through over this. Now, we talked about the hijacking of the cars. That was really one of the big focuses that was discussed after this. But there's so many other parts to this. And it's like we've said, hacking and leaving the digital footprints of a foreign country. They've already done this many times, guys. And this is the world we're already in. We've been in for a long time. So as he said, this is what they were doing 20 years ago. Imagine what they're actually doing now that we don't even grasp yet. Very important to think about. Now, the overlap of the AI, I think, is just impossible to decouple from all this, right? I mean, those parts are very relevant, but with the artificial intelligence, growth and how this will change all of this, again, my worry, what I argue is going to happen, my worry is that this will build something that we won't be able, like right now, we have ways to push back. We have ways to circumvent this. I think they're trying to build into a system that makes that impossible, that makes any effort to do so irrelevant. Just my opinion. But so this is the show we did, the impending future of AI government, but who controls the AI? So let's talk about that overlap with the AI conversation. Let's not forget that as we're seeing all of this, this is a government program. As DARPA original, or rather XAI was to start, was literally a DARPA AI explainable program that ended right before Elon Musk picked it up and made it XAI, then merged them both together. And now XAI is working with the Department of War with their AI mission. This is what it was really all about, guys, in my opinion, anyway. The quiet transition, but from DARPA's XAI to Elon's XAI. And we have Wide Awake Media pointing out in the World Economic Forum conversation, we showed you this in the last show, saying we need an end to anonymity on social media under the guise, and this is Wide Awake Media writing under the guise of combating misinformation and hate speech. Well, yes, that's exactly what this administration is doing under the guise of anti-Semitism, like the Biden administration was doing under the guise of I guess, hate speech in a more broad sense. It's the same agenda. And they're doing this. Important to think about. As Glenn Greenwald writes, several of Spain's most important works of literature, going back in history, were produced anonymously or with pseudonyms. It is true for most countries. Either way, the demand that all internet activity be attached to your government ID is the greatest threat to internet freedom and free speech. He's right. This has nothing to do with somehow saving you from problems. They create most of those, if you want to be honest about it. It is literally about controlling your life. His point makes it clear. The idea that if this is the case, internet doesn't necessarily change it all that much, but really we can see what they're trying to do. And even if you don't agree with that, even if you think it has the best of intentions, well, right, let's just take a Republican right now. Aren't you the ones telling us the Democrats are going to do everything they can to hurt you? Well, why would you give the government that power when they will swing back around at some point? Just seems like willful ignorance. Maybe because they secretly believe that somehow he'll be president forever, which is what they all kind of sometimes do. But here is an important overlap. Cryptid Politics says, let me play the clip really quickly. This is Trump talking about robots of all things.
Robots, but you're going to have to get somebody to start those robots, and you're going to have to improve the robots, but we're going to have robotic factories plus manpower. So we're going to have enough. We're going to need the help of robots and other forms of, I guess you could say, employment. We're going to be employing a lot of artificial things, but the beauty is we're going to have more jobs than we've ever had.
Yeah, except totally not, though. Completely, absolutely not at all. Like the idea that you're somehow going to have more jobs than ever when you completely take away jobs, it's just such a lie. But this is what he does. And it really, in the way he tends to do it. But employment, artificial things. I mean, he's so clumsily, really, but thinking he's being careful about saying certain things. The reality is you don't employ a robot, but doesn't that open an entirely weird conversation of what they actually think? A human rights or what they call it, like a Magna Carta for the rights of AI and robots. Like there's been weird conversations like that from these people. And it overlaps very alarmingly with the very weird transhumanist kind of longevity focused teal weird technocratic circle that talk about these things or putting their brains in the cloud and becoming gods. I mean, they actually discuss this stuff. Whether you think these are connected, the point back to the statement is robots and exchange. So we're talking about labor. We're talking about removing jobs from people. We're talking about building a system that makes us irrelevant. This becomes undeniably connected to universal basic income. Doesn't this feel exactly like what we were all screaming about during the Great Reset? Yes, it is. It's exactly the same thing, but Trump's saying it, so it's okay. Not really, though. Not to people with a brain, not to people that actually care, which I think is the majority of Republicans too. The majority of conservatives, more accurately. I really do, guys. I mean, we got to stop falling for the partisan representation of how everything is. I don't think most Democrats or most Republicans are actually the way they frame them. But this is crazy to me. And as Steve writes, we were there. Actually, he says, I don't like this at all. Cryptid first. I don't like this at all from Trump. And you shouldn't either. Why is he supporting replacing humans? We're going to need help of robots and other forms. Steve says, there were a number of us explaining this before the election, and y'all said we were just blackpilled. always a relevant point in my mind because many of the people that were doing that are now trying to gain credit for pointing to it and criticizing them, even though you've already created that table. Now, maybe they do see it. I'd like to think that. But if they inevitably fall right back into the partisanship game, which most of them are, then they're just using you, guys. Got to wake up to that. Now, I'm going to include my show I did called The Technocratic Tiptoe, a play on David Icke's totalitarian tiptoe. And it's really just the same point, but with the technocratic transition. And I think this is what we're watching. I think this is a large encapsulation of where it goes. And I think this administration is pegged to really roll this out. Now, Jason Bassler pointed out that starting 2 days ago, Australians are now required to upload their ID to use a search engine. This is what our government's pushing too, guys. Digital ID, age checks, biometric gateways. Australia is the beta test for a world where freedom and privacy quietly die, and it won't stop there. He's right. Now realize that Australia basically serves in a lot of ways as a vassal state to the U.S. agenda, and clearly this is what they're pushing. This is not what if you believe that they're trying to fight for privacy and less government, make sense of this for me. Now, I'm briefly going to include this since we kind of touched on it yesterday, but I just want to include the larger point of not only is that happening, but what I feel is sort of I guess I wouldn't call it manufactured, because this very well could just be a byproduct of what the agenda that they want is doing, or rather what the agenda what they're driving toward is creating, which is a potential massive global choke point or shortage in regard to water. And I guarantee other resources too, as it goes forward with rare earth minerals, whatever else. But I shouldn't say I guarantee, but that's my feeling. We must recognize by now that already the demand for what they were already doing from water was insane and inevitably going to create some kind of a problem. But on top of that, they've been expanding and growing, and more AI data centers just blowing up. And on top of that, a new study came out showing you that right now, as it's still even growing, that I think the point was we're about to pass the consumption level of the world's water consumption. Saying that terribly, but basically there's a study that showed that the amount of water we consume in bottled water, the AI consumption is exceeding that now, or about to. I mean, I don't think it speaks for itself, because it shows you that it's not all water, but bottled water is a huge part of the consumption. If we're using more than they can manufacture, I mean, this is just a foregone conclusion. If we continue in this path, we are going to have a massive shortage. My point in bringing this all up is that this, I argue, as that's what I was saying in the beginning, is not necessarily like this might not have been the design, but I argue that people like this see an opportunity in creating a choke point. We talked about the idea of the global supply chain, or that clip we played from Israel too, but the idea of COVID-19 and Great Reset, when we saw all these supply chain issues, and we saw the food chain, like the idea, or the supply chain of like farms and so on, right? We saw this get attacked. Water is by far more important than anything else, because you need that for everything. And if you can create a shortage, a choke point, where then basically governments can demand anything they want, now that may seem crazy to some people, but if you look through history, guys, this always happens. So whether this was the plan or just a byproduct, I think it will be applied. And I think we need to say something about this as individuals, as communities, populations, speak to your government, speak to people who you think care, speak to people who have money and influence that might say something about it. I think we need to speak up, because I don't believe that this is in our interest in any way, shape, or form. Now, the point is that overlapping, actually what I should do is show you something like this first, right? That as we're literally watching all this play out, it has already been established and was, sort of like how in the past, it's a different overlapping. It's irrelevant. It's not relevant to this conversation, but the point is the same. You take media, DVDs, videotapes. Historically, you might not know this. It's a pretty well-known point. The only thing, the main thing that's driven which was chosen, VHS or whatever the one, Betamax, whatever it's called, was pornography. And still arguably tends to be the case, which if there's a divide between which technology, the laser disc or DVD, right? It was whichever one the pornography industry leaned into. And it very clearly tracks. My point is, in this case, you can watch how the military leans into certain things. Right now, we already have this example that war focus is where it's guided. And so right now, the AI is coming into whatever it's going to be. And what do they do first, or really just as fast as they can? Kill people. They use it to literally create a genocide. Now, this is Palantir. They tried to deny this in the beginning, but it is objectively clear. It has been proven. This is Palantir is, it doesn't show up right now. I was trying to grab one I looked at before. There it is. Has a strategic partnership with Israel. That was clear from the beginning. And this was on January 2024, way past the genocide ongoing. Peter Thiel, Israel agrees strategic partnership for battle tech. But even then they said, no, that's not that's not Lavender. And there was also this one too, called a mass assassination factory. This is all from 972 magazine, a prominent Israeli platform. And this one was called Hapsora. Now, these were one's generally more buildings, one was more individually focused. Both of them are committing genocide. That's come out extensively. It's become very clear that Palantir is involved with what they're doing. So it is being used to commit genocide. Now, the bigger thought should be, how will this eventually be utilized where you are? Well, guess what? That's already happening, right? Palantir is already utilizing this in your countries. We saw that with Europe. This is what I call I'll include this one, the Great Palantir Reset, because this was using immigration under the guise of going after the bad guys. But no, they were surveilling all of us, and they still are. And I will bet my life that they'll continue to long after whatever they claim this was, or whether it goes away. They'll go on forever, because that wasn't about immigration. That was the excuse to roll out the mass surveillance platform. And as we just saw in Germany, for example, the German parliament approves the use of Palantir software, which, by the way, we just showed you that Gotham is already being used in every police car. Like, guys, this is gone. It's happened already. So this is what they're using to commit genocide is being aimed at you. Important to think about. So, talking about the larger war overlap and how AI is absolutely playing a role in all of this, let's break down the peace president. All right? Let's go over all the obvious ways that Trump is absolutely not committing war crimes or starting new wars or carrying on old ones and, ending wars is what he also claimed, by the way. He didn't just claim he was going to not commit new wars. He's already done that. He claimed very clearly and repeatedly that he would end the wars we had. None of that's happened. They've weirdly still love to argue he's ended 7 conflicts. You can ask Grok if you want. That's not true. Not any of them. It's just embarrassing. They try to point to different things like skirmishes or, like India and Pakistan, for example, where he wouldn't speak to them and, we ended that conflict. No, you didn't. Nothing really changed. They just are in the middle of a conversation. They're always fighting each other. The point is clearly everyone they claim, Ukraine, Israel, a lot of this. He's not ending anything. In fact, he's still supporting the wars. So let me play this clip again, since it's what we started with again, and I think it's relevant to the start the war conversation.
I'm going to stop wars.
No more wars, no more disruptions. We will have prosperity and we will have peace. Under Trump, we will have no more wars, no more disruptions, and we will have prosperity and peace for all. I am the candidate of peace. I am peace.
Okay. So let's start with Syria. Now, this is a bit different. The rest of these are much, much more on, very clear on its face. I found this one interesting for a couple reasons. One, because we obviously must know by now that Israel and the United States are absolutely supporting, working alongside, and always have been, by the way, the ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group that is running Syria, which is just embarrassingly ridiculous if you listen to anything they claim every day and always have. But you can prove all this stuff. That's what I say every time. This image was literally taken after they took over Syria, and they're rolling through wearing ISIS patches. You can use reverse image search and prove it to yourself that this was their people. And yet none of the mainstream media breaks this down. None of the mainstream alternative media breaks this down. None of these big-time journalists. Look, they're over here breaking down the Epstein up. Okay, why wouldn't one of them go, look, they're supporting ISIS? Because apparently that's just not allowed to be discussed by anybody. But really, there's a bigger point to this. I will go over some brief points about what's going on, but it's a protest. First, we'll start with a bombing that took place. But right now, they're also protesting in Syria, and they're killing people in those protests. Now, if you remember how this all started, it's technically a lot before that, but the narrative outward facing towards everybody, there were protests in Syria, right? And Assad killed them and gassed them, right? And then we have to go in because we want to save everybody. And look at how it's going today. They sure saved everybody. They saved them just like they did in Libya, right, guys? They never wanted to do that. They never even cared about that. The point, though, is that they used that justification, which you can prove, by the way, that they were involved with creating those fake protests, or rather co-opting what people were protesting, and then made them violent to justify these acts. The point is they do this everywhere. They got caught in Venezuela. They got caught in Ukraine. It's all been, not proven because I think it. Proven because you have documentation. Proven because you have whistleblowers. It's all on the surface. Now that there's protests and the government's killing them, guess what's not happening? I just love this. I shouldn't say love, but it's so important to see the contradicting narratives, so you'll see as we go through this. First, Jason Ditz from antiwar.com, December 28th. At least 11 killed as Alawite mosque bombing in Syria leads to violent protests. Now, we're going to talk about this bombing first and the Alawite minority, as well as Christians and Shiites. It's very clear that they're aiming at this is a religious war. It always has been. Israel primarily leading this, and they're executing people all across this country. And they're literally leading with the Hayat al-Sham, ISIS, Al-Qaeda group. More Al-Qaeda, but the point is the terrorists they claim they're fighting. 2025, he writes, has been the first full year in power for the Hayat al-Sham, HTS, in Syria. And the defining topics of the year have been the return of Syria to international diplomacy and bloody violence against religious minorities within the country. It always just baffles me that we can have such obvious realities like this. Just undeniable realities. Hayat al-Sham, no one's denying that that's who they are, right? And that's very clearly the group they told you were terrorists because they are. Or Trump still supporting vaccines. It's just like, what cartoon are we living in? It's just so obvious. Or an ongoing genocide that we pretend is not happening. It's like there's a very clear kind of, mental block for people. And that's the current core of the conversation, but not in any way the majority, in my opinion. Anyway. The first of the major massacres against a religious minority came in March, when government forces participated in the summary execution of Alawite civilians in the northeastern part of the country. Of course, they didn't care about any of that because that's their people doing it. I'm talking about the U.S. government, Israel. Over 1,300 were killed at the time, but the violence never really ended. It just slowed. Now, we covered that at the time. Over the weekend, the violence hit a central city of Homs, where an Alawite mosque was bombed during Friday prayers. Funny how you never got reports of that from the corporate media, huh? Because it only matters when it's specific situations and specific light. It says at least 8 people were killed in this incident and 18 others were wounded. The bombing was claimed by the group Sayara Ansar al-Sunnah. Sayara Ansar al-Sunnah is a splinter group that broke off from Hayat al-Sham in February. So a group that broke off of the current government is the one that's doing this. And you could argue that it's not really broken off, of rather how that appears. That's just a personal, it could be point. And has conducted multiple attacks on specifically Shiite and Alawites and other religious minorities, but that's been the predominant focus. Christians too, by the way. But you know why that makes sense? Because especially since we're talking about Hayat al-Sham and all the rest of these terrorist groups that the U.S. and Israel have always supported, because we're talking about the Sunni Wahhabist connection. We're talking about the Saudi Arabia core of ideology that they've used to basically create all of this. And it's always been seemingly focused on Christians and Shiites and all the people that push back against Israel and the United States. That doesn't mean that there's not bad people in any conversation. There's extremists in Christian groups and Alawite groups and Shia groups. In every group, you'll find people that are insane. It's the way the world works, guys. But to make it about one group or one religion, that's the issue. Now, also, their highest profile attack was in June when they claimed credit for, guess what? The Mar Ellis church bombing. Funny how the Christian right didn't care about that. This was in Damascus, which killed 27 people. The government blamed ISIS at the time. Isn't that perfect? Even though the group we just told you about, Sayara Ansar al-Sunnah, insists it was them. So think about this, guys. This is the whole point. It's not even inaccurate. I mean, ISIS is more of a stretch than Al-Qaeda, but my point is they're calling it ISIS because that's what the U.S. and Israel are claiming they're fighting, even though they're literally working with these groups all over the world, including in Gaza. My point, though, and I mean, that's the ISIS-linked gangs they were using to shoot people in the food lines, which has been proven. Do I need to bring the article up again? I'm sure everyone already knows. He says, what's wrong with that in front of the Knesset? The point is that they say ISIS did it. The Jolani-led Hayat al-Sham terrorist organization running Syria, even though the group that split off from them were the ones that did it and still claim they did it. So it shows you that this is Jolani and his group know what's going on, guys. They know that they're going to be allowed to completely do what they want in this country. It's, other than what Israel wants and the U.S. demands of them, as long as they just continue to tell the world what they want them to hear. So when they claim ISIS did this or ISIS involved with the terror attack on Halloween, think about what that really means and how flimsy this ultimately is every time. So a bombing in a mosque, a bombing in a church, done by the group currently running Syria. Okay, so now you get average people just trying to live their lives, always being thrown back and forth between some U.S.-Israel agenda and terrorist group being funded, and they're just trying to live their lives. And you know who allowed them to do that? Assad. Despite what you want to think about him, despite what you want to argue, you could call him a murderer or a criminal. I don't agree with the larger framing, but it's irrelevant to the fact that people voted for him and people were successful under him and people were allowed to live the lives they wanted. That's why there was one of the largest Christian populations in all of the Middle East and Syria before the U.S. and Israel destroyed it all and then blamed it on Muslims. Now, look, you can go all day long about arguing anything you want. The point comes down to freedom and liberty and self-determination, on top of just the facts that you can easily, like the claims of Assad gassing people, which have been proven to be lies every single time. Aaron Mate has done amazing work on this. It's worth your time. The point being, now they're in charge. The groups they tell you are going to save Syria, and these groups are the terrorists. And now you have average people protesting because their lives are being destroyed continually, right? And I'll include these, by the way, of the different ISIS overlaps to all of this. Secretary Marco Rubio. Oh, and this was just to show you that first, this is the leader. Next, I'm going to get into the protests and what that reveals. This was on November 10th. He says, today, the Trump administration suspended the mandatory Caesar Act sanctions in order to support Syria. Right. The sanctions that have stopped Syria from being able to build and basically get their lives back on track because they never wanted the world to make it. They didn't want it to be seen that Syria could actually succeed without them. So they literally kept a noose around their neck. They kept their boot on their neck the entire time. And only when they let the terrorists take over or made them take over did they finally remove the sanctions. I mean, it's just comical if it wasn't so disgusting. And Decentrate News says how it started, how it's going. I mean, you just can't miss this, guys. This is the same guy, and they had a $10 million bounty on him. And then literally he takes power, puts a suit on, has a haircut, and that bounty stayed up for at least a couple more weeks, and then they took it down. It's just insane. There's Trump with his big smile on. Just pathetic. Okay. So, Syrian government troops deployed to Latakia, Tartus after deadly clashes. So remember how they claim this Assad killing protesters. We have to do something. Well, here's the Syrian government currently run by Hayat al-Sham, supported by Israel and the United States, killing protesters. It says Syrian government troops have been deployed to coastal cities in Latakia and Tartus after demonstrations led to deadly clashes, in which at least 4 people were killed and 108 injured. Isn't that the same conversation? Like, why is it now? It's, well, those are the bad guys and we're fighting for freedom, except that's exactly what the other, the point is always is it comes down to whatever you want to frame it as, guys. When your guys are on the side, then they're the good, whether they're the freedom fighters. When it's the other side, they're the terrorists. It's all completely framing. The truth is that what we can see is people simply protesting the government that is absolutely run by terrorists, and their lives are being destroyed. People are being executed in the streets, and they're going, we don't like this. They come out and they act violently with them. And then the framing becomes the government's fighting off terrorists. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. I mean, you can, literally. Syrian Ministry of Defense, so again, that's Jolani, that's the Hayat al-Sham group, announced on Sunday that army units with tanks and armored vehicles had entered the center of the cities, because that's what happens in freedom, liberty states, right? This is a martial law, terrorist-run country. And it says, in response to attacks by, quote, outlaw groups against civilians and security forces with a mission to restore stability. Now, as happens every time, including with what happened during Assad, people are protesting because that does happen. Even during Assad, people had disagreements with him and they protested. But in most cases, as Vanessa would show you, they didn't want anybody else involved. They just wanted to protest against their government and have things resolved within the government. But in this case, or rather under Assad, the point was they had protests and then random people showed up with black masks on, kind of like we have in this country, and started throwing Molotov cocktails and then all of a sudden there was fire, right? So the idea is you create the justification for response, then blame the government for an overzealous response. In this case, like we've covered 100 times in the past, you can show that the person who shot protesters was not in Assad's government. Go back and look. We've covered all this. So too is most people talking about this. In this case now, you flip the script. Now you've got the Hayat al-Sham controlling it. You've got protesters coming up saying we're being killed. And it's the same conversation. Now, look, you could argue, and it's possible, it's just as likely, really, that some of these people are so desperate that they did act violently. I'm not going to condone or justify that, but you understand why that might be happening. I mean, I even take that back, to be honest. If you're living under something like this, I too would probably act out in a way that met whatever need was in front of me. This is like somebody punching you in the face. I'm not going to sit there and just take it. The point, though, is that overall, you know that they have people who are creating the conflict so that they can react a certain way and call them outlaw groups. It's just funny how this is the same old game. Syrian state news agency Sana quoted officials reporting that the attacks were carried out by, quote, and this is what they admit, remnants of the defunct regime. So yes, you have people who are still fighting for whatever they had under Assad who are being attacked in the streets. And it says clashes reportedly broke out as the protesters were confronted by pro-government demonstrators and masked gunmen opened fire on security personnel. See my point? So certainly those could be masked gunmen who are fighting for their country. Or it could be the people trying to make this the case so they could claim that they were fired on by the terrorists. See, Jelani's just the good guy trying to fight off the evil Assad supporters. Goes on to say, Alawite protest. The violence has flared as thousands of Alawite Syrians who have been being massacred, guys. In fact, that's this right here. Or this one, hold on. Hold on. Not that I need to show it, but I think it's important to see it. The video and the videos in the show in the links, you can still find it. But this over here, that's what was happening right here. These were Alawites that were being put down on the ground. They were laughing at him, and you can see the ISIS patch right on his vest. And then on video, they open fire and execute them on the ground. Now, whatever they were, whoever they were, whatever their religion, that's a crime. That's a war crime. You're not supposed to execute people who are unarmed and surrendering, even though they all do that. It's still a crime. So what's interesting is that we have the groups being literally ethnically cleansed, and they're the ones supposed to be the problem in the situation as the U.S. and Israel are framing it. And it says they took to the streets across the religious minorities' heartland in central and coastal parts of Syria on Sunday to protest against violence and discrimination. A call to, quote, show the world that the Alawite community cannot be humiliated or marginalized after the deadly bombing of the mosque we just showed you. The bombing, which killed 8 people, which is interesting when you think about it, because this is the group they're telling you are the terrorists, and they're the ones being ethnically cleansed. Their mosques are being bombed. And yet they're the ones, it's so clear where the violence is coming from. And it says the bombing, which killed 8 people and was claimed by a Sunni group, as we told you, known as Saraya Ansar al-Sunnah, Sunni group, it's important, and that's not meant to be one bad, one good. The point is to remember that that's the connection back to the, kind of Saudi Wahhabist mentality, and not really so much that as more importantly, the divide and the religious point from Israel's perspective of the Sunni and Shiite divide and which side they've taken clearly. And it goes on to say the latest violence against the religious minority to which the ousted former President Assad also belongs and which had huge prominence under his rule. You see, so now any Alawite is being killed because of that and plenty of other reasons. Not justified, but in their minds. The protesters also demanded that the government implement, and this is interesting, what they refer to as federalism. But here's how they frame it. So the word itself, I'm not a fan of for many reasons, but the way they frame it, which is what's important, a system that would see power decentralized from Damascus in favor of greater autonomy for minorities. And then also release the Alawite prisoners that they're taking without charge. Sounds familiar? So aside from the term federalism, which I don't even think is really a good, despite how that may very well be the exact definition, the word federalism just doesn't ring true for me with that framing, personal opinion. So a decentralized power structure that gives more power to, individual. I think that's exactly what most people are talking about. Not necessarily, not some kind of a socialist mindset or any government idea that can ultimately centralize the top. That's what they're all doing. That's different than any of them. Decentralized is the idea, my personal opinion anyway. So what they're calling for is not what's currently happening, not a centralized power structure that's taking orders from outside. Doesn't sound like a terrorist group to me. And it says, quote, we do not want a civil war, they say. We want political federalism. And again, how they framed it up there. We do not want your terrorism, they said. We want to determine our own destiny. This is the Islamic Alawite Council in Syria. Now it says, quote, we just want to sleep in peace and work in peace. If this situation continues like this, then we want federalism. Again, decentralized government. Why is it that every day or every other day, 10 of us are killed? I mean, think about this. Same statements can be made from Palestinians. Same statements can be made from Yemen. I mean, there's so many examples of this happening. And yet all you get in the corporate media in most of these Western countries are one-sided narratives that frame Israel, the United States, and the UK, and all that as the heroes saving the world when they're out there doing this, or at the very least, supporting it or looking the other way while it takes place. Here's an interesting overlapping point. Some quick video. I'll let him say it for himself. And I agree with this.
Every country right now is having protests against corrupt governments. Look at this. Jesus. It's like a global contagion. A lot of people are just getting tired of this, except the USA. The USA is designed in a way that everybody blames the other side rather than realizing that it's basically both sides.
Right? I mean, who knows if it's hard to say, but you could prove that's true. But, clearly there's a lot of protesting going on. There's a lot. We saw a huge global surge around the campus protests, which they really tried to make about, one thing, like a U.S. conversation. No, it wasn't left or right. And it was a global thing about calling out the genocide. What's interesting, though, he makes an interesting point, which I'm always pointing out. What's weird is that you don't really see. Now, I'm not really of the mind that protesting is the most effective way, but it's not like it's irrelevant. In fact, it can be very important. It can have major effects. But I just don't think it should be the only thing relied on because it can be subverted. It can be manipulated. But think about what he said, that we're so focused. I shouldn't say that. Too much of the conversation is so focused on only the other side. So you don't focus on the real culprit, guys. This is what I've been saying forever. If you can only see your neighbor as the problem, then you don't recognize the government taking your money out of your pocket or whatever you want to frame it as. I think it's a good point. Now, I'll include the article here, the war-focused peace president, because that's largely what we're getting into, where we go over it even back then. And this was November, same point. Now we'll start with Nigeria. Just a really quick update, because this is what we were recently talking about. Remember, this story is interesting. Nigeria clarifies what really happened with Trump's airstrikes. Now, this has been pretty public, like, across the board. It's come out where they're not really going, you screwed us over or you lied to us. I don't think that's ever going to happen because they're not in a position to do that. I think they know what'll happen if they do, that Trump or whoever else is going to make them pay. And if you really don't see that that's happening, I think you're paying attention. They're wildly vindictive today. Just look at Marjorie Taylor Greene or Thomas Massey, right? But what he's saying, or what the government of Nigeria is saying, is that ultimately there is no Christian massacre. There is no Christian genocide. That's not what's happening. Now, they may be lying about it. The point is they're claiming Sokoto, not Soboto, the place that was bombed and a couple areas around it, largely Muslim location, and everyone there says there's no issue. We live with our, both sides. Christians are there saying we're not persecuted. There's Muslims there saying we are brothers and sisters with our Christian friends. And yet what they ultimately did was just bomb a Muslim location, claiming they're fighting the Muslim threat. I think it's very obvious why they're pushing that narrative. It seems to me, my opinion, that Nigeria had some kind of an issue with what they called bandits. That was one of the words they used, or gangs. And for whatever reason, thought they could get an honest response from the United States government and said, hey, help us out. And they go, oh, we'll take advantage of that, and decided to use it to bomb something else and then claim what they wanted to, despite how that's not even what Nigeria was asking for. Now, there's more to it. Watch the last show we did. You can get into it. Here's an update. U.S. missiles hit 2 Nigerian villages far from intended target. This is the same conversation, but it's just been written yesterday by Dave DeCamp, and just kind of overview some important points and add some more. 2 villages in Nigeria were hit by U.S. missiles as part of the first U.S. strikes in Nigeria, which, of course, constitutes a new war. Yes, it does. No matter what anybody else wants to say, it 100% does. And, of course, like every other war, left and right, does not have congressional approval. That's a crime. It was launched on Christmas Day. Because, I don't even know any Christian, not to say that Christmas of the 25th is even necessarily, there's a reality to understand about that's not even the correct day in a religious construct, but nonetheless, it's still somewhat a day when we respect, people who have a Christian mindset, or anybody else, even if you're not a Christian. I kind of respect that there's a level of like decorum, I guess, on that day, but from a Christian person. To do that, it's the same reason I think Netanyahu bombs Gaza every Christmas Day. There's a reason for this. Anyway, bombing and killing people on Christmas Day doesn't seem like the best thing to do. And it says we're not the intended targets, however, according to the statement from the Nigerian government, meaning they bombed places that they weren't being asked to bomb. On Friday, Nigeria's information minister, Mohammed Idris, said the strikes were, which were launched by a U.S. warship on the Gulf of Guinea, targeted, quote, 2 major Islamic State terrorist enclaves. Again, I could go over again all the points showing you that those whatever you're calling ISIS has been provably something built and coordinated and continually supported by Israel, the United States, and other Western actors. It's just not debatable at this point. It is, and doesn't say they're in control of every element of it. In fact, as I've often pointed out, Mohammed bin Salman, leader of Saudi Arabia, has said publicly that ultimately many of the leaders in these movements don't actually believe the religious ideology that they're spreading to everybody else because it's more of a manipulation. And also that they created these groups and have lost control of many of them. Now, he could be lying about that, and I'm paraphrasing, but that's something he's put out. So remember that when you talk about ISIS and who they're fighting, especially with what we just saw from Syria. But he says 2 major ISIS groups in the forests of Tangaza district in Nigeria's northwest Sokoto state. I laughed. The point is the U.S. government accidentally, I guess, wrote Sokoto, which is embarrassing, in an area that's not known as the hub for ISIS, raising questions about why it was the U.S.'s first target. Idris also said, now I do want to clear one thing. This on Friday is when Nigeria's information minister said this. Their original statement said nothing about ISIS. They said gangs and bandits. So I think this is simply them trying to throw a bone to the agenda of the Trump administration. Probably is already frustrated with the way that they responded. Very clearly saying there is no Christian issue here. So this may be a way to go, Trump, don't attack us. Or, hold us, do whatever you want to do because we made you look stupid. Now it says, Idris also said the debris from U.S. missiles landed in the villages of Jabo and Sokoto, as well as Afa, a village in the central western Kwara state, hundreds of miles from Sokoto. Idris downplayed the damage to the villages, saying that there were no civilian casualties. However, residents of Afa say several homes were destroyed by U.S. missiles and some injuries were reported. So that he would downplay that as a representative of this country, I think adds to my point. But it says, Omale added that the residents of the village are now, quote, appealing to the government to take steps to address the destruction and provide some form of assistance. Reports, so this is the U.S. helping. So countries out there need to recognize what it looks like to be helped by the U.S. government. Reports based on images of debris posted on social media suggest that at least 3 Tomahawk missiles fired by the U.S. warship fell short of their target. So either incompetence, technological incapabilities, or just that they weren't doing what they were claiming. You can decide. Go out there and look up how much 1 Tomahawk missile costs. Go ahead and find out for yourself what that means when they fire 3 of them and spend this much money for something that had nothing to do with seemingly anything anybody wanted. Tajuddin Alabi, a former special assistant to the Kwara state governor in Nigeria, told the BBC that some people were injured by the falling debris. At least, a quote, at least about 5 structures were destroyed in different locations. We saw some objects in a popular hotel, which we call Afa Central Hotel. It looked like a bomb. Is this beginning to develop into a picture of fighting ISIS? Appears like, this appears to be a complete whole cloth, like wag the dog kind of scenario. I guess not even that, because they didn't do anything. They just bombed a location and just lied about it. If this seems, and I do think this is what the evidence backs up. Residents of Jabo questioned President Trump's claims that, so these are the residents in the area, both Christians and Muslims, that they question his claims that he launched airstrikes to defend Nigerian Christians. Quote, in Jabo, we see Christians as our brothers. We don't have religious conflicts, so we weren't expecting this, one of the villagers said. Other Jabo residents said they didn't understand why their village was hit since their community has not been subject to attacks by armed bandit groups or the group called La Karawa that they're claiming as an ISIS-linked group, which many people claim is not even the case. If they say an armed group suspected of being affiliated with ISIS, analysts suspect La Karawa was the target of the U.S. airstrikes, though the group's ties to ISIS are unclear. I think that's a generous way to say that. The more well-known jihadist groups in Nigeria, ones that are pretty well established, like, Boko Haram, operate in northwest Nigeria. But then you could show Boko Haram has weird connections to the U.S. and Israel. Oh, we don't want to talk about that. So clearly this is not about what they're claiming if you really look at the facts. I think that's pretty much always the case because these are bad actors, guys. But what's interesting about the group and the affiliate thing, they just made this case with other conversations. So you're telling me a affiliate, rather an ISIS-linked affiliate, like multiple disconnections. So not the group, not even a link, but an affiliate linked to the group. Okay. Well, right now, that's what Netanyahu's working with in Gaza. I made the point in the last show. The ISIS-linked gangs, which has come out publicly in their own Knesset conversation. So if you're going to bomb them for that, then wouldn't you bomb Israel for the same reason? I guess not. Now it says Daniel Bwala, a spokesman for President Bola Tinubu, told the French press agency on Saturday that the strikes targeted ISIS militants who were in the country to work with La Carawa. Okay. See, this is what you do when you're scrambling. Well, that didn't work. So what do we tell them now? Oh, well, they were just they flew in just to help. And that was it. Oh, so you bombed a bunch of cities that had nothing to do with it because a couple of ISIS groups showed up to help a different group? Yeah, I don't think that one lines up. And it says a day earlier, he said the U.S. claims that the strikes were sketchy and said he would have more information in the coming hours. You see how this works? So they were lied to. Clearly, the U.S. government did whatever they wanted, as usual. And then he first responds going, well, they were kind of sketchy because it clearly ended up being something that they didn't talk about. They said there was no genocide. There is no, or rather, they claimed it as killing Christians. Then, after some days go by and they have a chance to talk and people in the U.S. government get in their ear, he comes in and goes, well, there were a couple ISIS guys that showed up. And it all makes sense. No, it doesn't. It very much does not, even with a couple, whatever they frame it as, that strikes targeted U.S. militants who were in the country to work with the group. That seems, so that's a transient thing. So why would you bomb these locations then? You see my point? So that by that argument, that's like what Israel's doing. So they happen to be passing through. So you bomb a civilian location in hopes that you get them. Well, it's very Israeli-like, very Israel-type policy. While the U.S. launched the strikes in cooperation with the Nigerian government, Nigerian officials have pushed back on the Trump administration's claim that there is a Christian genocide. I guess he did say that. In Nigeria, saying the violence affects everyone. So yes, maybe violence taking place, which I think many points to be made. But the fact that he made it a lie about that shows you it's not at all, but Nigeria got taken advantage of. And this is just one example that we're seeing. I'll include the show. Israel continues bombing Gaza during ceasefire, and Netanyahu aims to swap ISIS-linked gangs for Hamas. Also, an overlapping point from before, I posted this on January 7th, 2024, where we saw this. ISIS claims responsibility for deadliest attack in Iran. Well, it's interesting, right? Seeing as how they're telling you that Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism and funds and works and controls ISIS. Wait a minute, that doesn't make much sense until you just stand back and use your brain. How many times exactly do we need to see ISIS, whatever that is, attack the enemies of Israel at the peak of hostile rhetoric before we truly understand what we're seeing? Because at this moment, they were at an issue with Iran, right? I just think at the end of the day, this continues to show you that at every time, or ISIS apologizing for attacking Israel, which I showed in the last show as well. ISIS fighters regret attacking Israel and have apologized, according to the defense minister. You just can't ignore stuff like this. You either engage with the facts or you put your head in the sand. It's always what this means. Now, an overlap, of course, which is just as relevant, and it's another location, Somalia, which, so now we got the Minnesota point, which is connected to all of this, and they've been doing the same things. Or you got what was the other one? I'm blanking on the other one now. Anyway, there's a bunch. He's done it with Haiti. He's done it with a lot of these locations because there's geostrategic points. It's not about helping people. It never is for these people. This one, Dave DeCamp already talked about. To understand how unprecedented this bombing campaign is in Somalia, check out this handy chart from New America. They do a good job of tracking the air war. Trump has bombed Somalia this year more than Bush, Obama, and Biden combined. I mean, do your best to explain why that's a peace president, guys. I mean, it doesn't, even if you go, but there's bad guys there. Okay. Is that America first? I mean, you're contradictory no matter which way you go here. And look at that. Trump is wildly, even Trump team 1 first administration is 3 times everybody else. Now it's even higher. You think this is about freedom? Come on. We can't be this easy to play. And Sam Husseini rightly says, so Trump bombed the hell out of Somalia out of the public view for a year, paving the way for Imperial Israel to move to breaking it up with an eye to expelling Palestinians to a breakaway section. So if you haven't seen it, first of all, sort of like South Sudan itself, same point. But in this case, we're talking about Somalia. The point is being the Somaliland discussion is an illegitimate state. Now, by the way, I think it's relevant to the larger sort of breakaway network state point, where they just kind of take territory and recreate it into the way they want. That's what I think this is kind of like with Gaza, for example, and how they're aiming to make it this new technocratic place. But the real takeaway point is Somaliland is a fake place. It's territory seized by Israel and Western powers where they've just turned it into something they can control. Now, what he's saying is that they bombed it like this, destabilized to a point where they could move in and do that. And now that they've done that and have created it, and now Israel, as you might have seen in the last show, says we endorse Somaliland, which has really never happened like this. They're usually the background player. Israel doesn't come out and endorse, at least in my experience. So I think there's a reason for this. So what he's saying is that they're planning, which I think is we're going to get into now, and I think is very clear, to maybe the only, at least the primary location where they're planning to move Palestinians against their will, which is a crime. Every which way we've told you from the very beginning, this is the plan, and now they're doing, it's been clear from day one. The evidence has shown you they've been wanting to do this from day one. They've been saying they want to do this, but then the Western media goes, that's not true and you're racist, every time. But he goes, and when his attacks got a bit of coverage, Trump tried to reframe it as an immigration issue and pretended to be America first. That's when it became, for some reason I'm blanking on their names today. There's Elon Omar. There's, the point is, I think Omar's the one that's basically making it about them and immigration. And now the Minnesota fraud case. Clearly, there's bigger pictures here. And this is meant to couch it in something that's digestible for the partisanship. So here's RT. This came out the 28th. This is translation, but you look at the subtitles. It says, fight Israel plot to encircle the whole Middle East. Top diplomat says, Israel will secretly purge Palestinians to a satellite Somaliland, then surround Saudi Arabia, Saudi, Egypt, Yemen, and Turkey. This is a Turkish ex-foreign minister. So that's just his opinion, right? But I think it's relevant. And as we get into it more, the map. Somebody's asking for the map in the chat. Which map you mean? The Somaliland one? I don't think I have it pulled up right now. If you want to throw me a link in the chat, guys, I'll bring up the map. I showed it in the last show, though. The Yemen. I mean, it's a good point. I made the point in the last show. The importance of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Strait of Hormuz, and that's why the Yemen war, the Yemen genocide was taking place. And Somaliland is just another extension of that. They're just trying to control this important area. But go ahead and put it in the chat, guys, and I'll bring it up. But the point, though, is that this is his opinion. But there's a lot of evidence to it. Now, here's another example. In December 28th, and you can listen to it for yourself. It's a couple minutes long. A Spaces, which, by the way, is that even still happening? I don't even see that stuff anymore. But a Twitter Spaces, Dr. Dan Diker, Jerusalem, Center president, he said the secessionist Somaliland clan enclave in northwest Somalia privately offered and approved by its president December 20th, which is not really the president of anything. It's like a Guaido, in my opinion, to resettle up to 1.5 million Palestinians forcibly displaced from their ancestral lands in Gaza into this breakaway territory. Israel recognized it days later. So what he's admitting here, or at least claiming, but Jerusalem, I don't want to keep saying that, Jerusalem. It's weird. My mind wants to make it another syllable. Center president. So basically he's on the Israel side of the conversation, claiming that this has already been discussed. But that's not something we're hearing from the international conversation, right? Quds News Network points out Israel has already built an advanced military facility at Berbera Airport in Somaliland, including 12 underground hangars for fighter jets and drones. This is what it's about, guys. And at the end of the day, you've stolen land and then turned it into one of your land launch pads. Now it says it's located in the Gulf of Eden, has one of the longest runways in Africa, originally built by the Soviet era. The United Arab Emirates maintained a strong military presence at the airport since 2017. They developed an airport and adjacent port through DP World and established a base used for operations in Yemen, which we've talked about many times, and for monitoring maritime routes. Israel became the first entity to officially recognize the self-declared Republic of Somaliland as an independent state. Dang it. It says Arab and Muslim countries, including Egypt, Somalia, and Turkey, rejected the recognition, warning that it threatened international peace and security. Let's see. Let's see if I can get it to pop up. I'm sure I can. Okay, here we go. Might not be the one you wanted to see, but this will do it. Let me get a bigger picture here. Let me just do this. Since you requested it, let's make it happen. So let me bring up my map real quick. 1 second. Okay, here we go. Now let me bring this down really quickly. Okay, let's see. There we go. Oh, that's the wrong one. There it is. Okay. So here is, and this is, and I agree, this is actually really important. I mean, we've done this many times. How do I get that to go away? There we go. Right. So here we are. Right. We're talking about this whole area right here, and ultimately, and you can look at that side by side on the map. Well, let me just do this so you guys can see it listed right on there. Okay. So here is the Somaliland-Somalia breakdown, but the important conversation is about this landmass, in my opinion. And I'm sure there's plenty of different overlays to this, but what's really important, and I've been talking about a long time, is over here. Make sure you guys can see that. Yeah, okay. Over here is the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, this is an important spot for Iran, and Iran controls this waterway for the most part, and ultimately has threatened to shut this waterway down, this strait, should there be any attacks on them, which they haven't really done. They have justification, but it'd be a major move, and it would shut down. It would really hinder a lot of supply chains, specifically oil. So I argue that's why the UAE has been co-opted in all these different locations. Qatar, right? Egypt. There's where's my favorite dictator, right? They've done all of this. They've literally, up here as well, Iraq, Syria. There's a reason, as you can see, there's a reason for why these things are being done. The point was Saudi Arabia being a very central part of the oil, shipping lanes conversation, and Iran threatening to have control here, which is what they were using. I think the argument is about trying to create an alternative route. And ultimately, because Yemen wasn't under the control to a degree, the war became about Yemen and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is right here. And they've been committing a genocide in Yemen the entire time. Now, alternatively, if you create this conversation and turn this right here into Somaliland and take it over, you can effectively then exert your control over that strait. Now, there's a lot of other factors as well, including like the argument of why they were trying to make like another route through Oman or to circumvent the Strait of Hormuz. There's a lot of stuff. And even if they didn't need this, there's other reasons why they would want to control these other, shipping. Control of these waterways is super important. But I think it's really incredible how long this has been going on and how you can look back at, you can go back to the Brzezinski and the Balkanization of Afghanistan and how they were going to further from there control the Middle East. This is the same conversation that's just splintered out into different agendas. There's so much that's been going on for quite a long time. So let's go back to the main part of this. There we go. Okay. So that's just, and they're showing you right here is just the Somaliland location, right? It's just like a split off of that location. So make sure I didn't miss that last one. Hold on. Oh, right. Okay. So just keep in place. So they've built a base there now. And I think that's super important, seeing as how it's been contested by, it's the idea that they already have a base that's built. Do you realize that didn't just happen? Like they didn't go, we support them now, and they did this in 24 hours, right? This has been being built, which I think is pretty, what else does that say? That they've been a part of this from the beginning, right? How else would that make sense? Which I don't think is even that hard to recognize. So yes, they've been occupying more territory and building new bases. It's no different than what the U.S. government is doing. And I frankly think it's the exact same agenda. As Kit Clarenberg was telling you before the 26th even, but he says in April, I predicted Somaliland, a brutal British neo-colony, was going to be a dumping ground for Palestinians, forcibly removed from Gaza. So in and of itself, a British neo-colony argument, right? So the point is clearly it's been a manipulation from the beginning. And now with Israel stepping into this and building a base, it shows you they've been involved as well. And it says the recognition looks like a clear step in that direction. And there's the recognition, officially recognized by the state of Israel. Now he says they're going for it. Breaking news, Somaliland's foreign minister, we're open to accepting Gaza residents, but official recognition must come first. Well, they've done that. Now the door's open. As if it doesn't matter that the Palestinians don't want to go there, right? This was a crime from the very beginning, as you should know by now. And on the 28th, day of decamp, U.S. airstrikes hit Somalia on Christmas Day as Trump continues unprecedented bombing campaign. Just continues. Now, Peter Kronaus points out the final phase of the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Gaza is about to begin. Reports in Israel that 1.5 million Palestinians will be sent to the new African nation of Somaliland. Israel's final phase of the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Gaza. Will the world keep tut-tutting and do nothing? I mean, Netanyahu is quite literally talking about this, guys. Now, on top of this, let's recognize that what we're talking, the number, right? I mean, that's why the very clear number that's been called out is about 600,000 that have been killed. I bet you it's even more than that. Because if we're only talking about 1.5 million people, then it's right there in front of you guys. They know what they've done. I think it's grotesque how obvious all of this is, and that your governments are 100% okay with it, or at the very least, incapable of pushing back for whatever reason you want to fill in the blank with. Now, overlapping this with what's going on in Israel, we just did another focus on it, and I want to make sure we continue to call this stuff out. Overlapping with that same conversation, while they're telling you we're going to, I mean, it's so cartoonish to see Israel doing what it's doing that the whole world can see, and then just like we in mainstream conversation, we just act like that's not a problem, that he's a respectable member of society. Not even his own people think that. The guy is a hair away from going to prison in Israel. Which, as long as he's in power, that's been held off. That's probably why he's holding on to power indefinitely. But Putin does it. He's a terrorist, right? And a gangster, probably to some degree. But Netanyahu does it. It's okay because he's fighting terrorists. It's whatever the framing is. In this case, meeting with Trump in Florida, which we'll talk about, and openly doing these things and acting like it's normal. Like these are what terrorists look like. In any case, suppressed news reports, I-24 News reports, and this was today, that Israel is carrying out a large-scale engineering works in Rafah and other Israel-controlled areas of Gaza Strip, which, by the way, is a complete violation of what the ceasefire, which was broken right in the beginning. I mean, the idea that we don't know that by now, wherever that was. Israel has killed at least 414 people, Palestinians, in Gaza since signing the ceasefire deal. It's just grotesque. You know what I mean? Like, it's insulting to our intelligence that we all pretend like this is not obvious to everybody. They know what's going on. They've murdered people. They bombed. They've kidnapped. They've continued to do this and acted like it's still a ceasefire. That point is important because they are currently breaking this because they claim they're still under a ceasefire. So this is a violation on top of everything else. So too are the yellow pillars and the encroachment of them and the killing of people crossing those lines. So this is part of the transition. In reality, now, they argue this, and I do agree with this. It's about covering up their crimes. I also think it's more about getting ready for the Gaza technocratic city, and it's not my opinion. They're telling you they're doing that. In fact, I'll include the plan that you can look at yet again, even though many of the most ridiculous conservative commentators were telling you this was a fake story when it came out. It's very real. This is the whole plan. You can walk through it, look at it. It is literally a technocratic. This is a great reset technocratic city, smart city, digital tokens, technocratic government. That's exactly how they frame it. Imagine coming out with this while they're telling you you're crazy for talking about technocracy. It's insane. But Israel is in reality clearing rubble, as he writes anyway, and I agree, to erase evidence of alleged war crimes before international journalists enter, while removing and selling debris to private recycling companies. So you're literally making money off of your genocide. It kills me. And it's no different than them wildly profiting off of the stolen land in the West Bank. It says I-24 claims the work is part of a project dubbed Green Rafah. Don't you love that? We're green and sustainable. They just use the words they think people will be okay with. Described as a pre-demilitarization. Just kills me. It says I-24 suggests the pace may reflect U.S. pressure. Of course it does. Oh, and then, of course, some people within his administration are pushing back about rebuilding before disarmament, which in and of itself creates an interesting point. So you're now building things, and you still have the excuse to be like, Hamas is doing this and doing that without ever having to prove it. Why wouldn't they take care of that first? My opinion, because I think that it's the whole reason they haven't done something stronger or done something different. They need the Hamas excuse. Like this reason they funded them from the very beginning, because they needed that Hamas excuse. On top of the fact that twice, as I can prove, they had a conversation about Hamas saying, fine, we will remove ourselves from the conversation. It will give you the bullet point. We'll disarm and we will remove ourselves from the government. And twice, the U.S. and Israel put the point back in. That was documented. It just didn't get a lot of attention. Now, the only way you make sense of that is that they wanted Hamas to continue to be the reason that they had to say, we can't do this. They won't let us do. No, they offered, like they did in the first week, twice, a full exchange for hostages if you just stop the war. And twice they turned it down. You could prove all this stuff, like anybody with a brain and conscience has actually cared to look. It says the real purpose is security surveillance, future military use, or potential settlements. I agree. 414 people killed just since the supposed ceasefire. Now, Trump says, this is so hilarious to me. This is today. Trump said, you could look up this exact title. In fact, let's do that real quick. You know, that's how these platforms work these days, is they don't really give you the old information anymore. They just want to show you what's currently happening. There's a reason for that. I'm just going to see if it shows an old one, because he said this many times. Let's do this. Anytime, custom range. Let's go. Let's do, what's the date today? Let's see if it pops up. See, look at this. I do it. That's so funny to me. What's this from? Oh, no, it is the new one. How does that make sense? Did I mess that up? Yeah, how did that end up weird? Anyway, I don't want to waste more time. I swear I typed that in right. 1101. Yeah, it says 1101. Why would that show December? God, these platforms are such crap. Anyway, the point is, I'm trying to waste more time on it. You know as well as I, he said this many times. I've talked about it before. How funny. Anyway, so he says, Hamas must disarm very soon or there will be hell to pay, which is hilarious, seeing as how I just told you that they personally put the point back in. It was that, you know, they were saying, we'll remove ourselves. And they made sure that they, you know, rather they remove the point, however you want to frame that they offered to remove themselves, and Netanyahu and the Israel and US and Qatar and all the rest didn't want that. So in the past, he said this more than once. And my point is to say that, you know, what does that even mean? You're going, you better not do what? Are the Hamas going to go, oh no, Trump said something, we have to just give up? Like, what a stupid, this is all about Trump. It's all about presenting yourself as the powerful one going, you better stop. And then what happened last time? Nothing. Where Israel commits the genocide, it continues, and they continue to support it, but it's not like he did something. He didn't bomb them, didn't step up and change anything. So it's just funny to me. It's all about another narrative, another tone in the moment when they need it. At a time when, guess what? They've already offered this. At a time when this is about creating the justification to continue to do what they're doing. That's all this is. The timing is about going, well, they better not do the thing, and now they didn't, so now we have to send them to Somaliland. It's all this comes down to in my mind. Now, J.D. Vance, a couple more points on Israel, admitted something very important that I think you need to see, which you already know because we've talked about it, because, by the way, it's very obvious. But many in the average conversation and maybe the mainstream conversation don't really know this is the reality. You know, that Jared Kushner is, as J.D. Vance puts it, the investor, a private family side of this in a major foreign policy development. Yes, because that's the whole thing. This administration has broken so many norms and so many conflicts of interest, it blows my mind. But I guess not even the Democrats want to talk about that because they're fighting each other, apparently. Here's what he said. It's very quiet, the question at first, but he answers. You'll hear it.
Well, Jared's the investor here. I'm not going to give you a percentage, but look, what we've seen the past week gives me great optimism the ceasefire is going to hold. And if we get from where we were a week ago.
Right. You know, the ceasefire, where they've killed 414 people, where they've bombed, where they've broken every rule. But yeah, it'll hold because the Hamas terrorists are willing to let that slide. Why? Because they are willing, they genuinely seem to want this to stop. But that's what's hilarious about this is they allow that. It's the same thing I pointed out with Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the United States when that was happening. Over and over and over, they would do that. Where Mike Pompeo, they'd have a fake ceasefire. The Houthis would literally stand down, and the Saudi Arabian side would push in and take more territory. It happened like 3 times in a row. And what did Trump and Pompeo say? The Houthis broke the ceasefire, just like Blinken did, just like Biden did, just like Trump does. It's embarrassing. But we're holding the ceasefire. The point is about the investor being Jared Kushner.
Fire is going to hold. And if we get from where we were a week ago to a long-term durable peace between Israel and Gaza.
Oh, Gaza. Right. You mean, see, you know why he's framing it that way? Because they plan to remove everything Palestinian and pretend that Gaza is now free. Just like they're doing in every one of these locations. Look, Syria's free now, guys. Syria's been saved. Libya's been liberated. Or not, or you killed everybody in slave camps and terrorists, but you know, it's all good because we've got what we wanted. Right? So think about that. Think about what he just said.
Israel and Gaza, there are going to be hills and valleys. There are going to be moments where it looks like things aren't going particularly well.
Oh,
But
okay.
given that, and given the history of conflict,
Don't trust your eyes. It may look bad, but it'll all work out.
I think that everybody should be proud of where we are today.
Right. Yeah, that's just telling you what you're supposed to think. Don't criticize. You're supposed to be proud. Go out there and say, I'm proud of what Trump does, no matter what it is. That's team. That's loyalty for you guys. But think about it. Gaza, right? Because they are planning to transition Gaza into a technocratic city. This is going to be one of the first teal freedom city, charter city. That's what they're doing. It's not my opinion. It's very easily proven with the funding, with the involvement, with the same conversation. They even call it one of the first ones. Or alternatively, you can prove that people like Roger Stone and the rest were calling Prospera a freedom city. You can show that all of this is interconnected. We're going to be doing an IMA panel on this conversation. I already been trying to set it up. It's going to be something we talk about: network state transition, the transition of society. I'm telling you, it's very important and about the central conversation of all this. It is technocracy. It is globalism. It is Zionist. It's impossible to decouple these things. That's not an all-encompassing every conversation, but this one is very clear. In this, though, when you talk about Gaza and not Palestinians or not, anything else, or even Hamas, even though they're the negotiator, it's because you are going to drive this out, whatever justification you need, create something new and act like you saved everybody. And your team sport followers will toe the line. I guarantee Nick Sorter and all the rest will go, that's the thing, whatever it is, because that's what their job seems to be. And he says, U.S. foreign policy outsourced to a family business deal. And this is from December 19th. Disclosed TV, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff pitched the Project Sunrise plan to turn Gaza into a high-tech metropolis. I mean, they're not even trying to hide this to a degree, which would see the U.S. commit roughly 20% of the reconstruction costs. But yeah, we're lowering spending, right? America first, ladies and gentlemen. Just ignore everything and pretend that's what's happening. Now, I'll include our show on this. Gaza Freedom Cities. And the plan itself, so you can look at it and read through it. Digital IDs, digital money, it's a whole thing. Now, Derek also points an overlapping point out that I think is very relevant because, conservatives more than anybody, we're calling out and fighting COVID-19, all the different parts of that illusion. And even though weirdly Trump was the one that initiated warp speed, and even though he still supports it and still tells you the shots saved 1 million lives, somehow that doesn't become part of the conversation. I just think that's a cartoon. But he says, you guys remember this? January 19th, 2021. It says, today, Donald J. Trump awarded presidential commendations to the below individuals in recognition, and this was real, he just typed it out, and there's a link to it below, in recognition of their exceptional efforts on Operation Warp Speed, one of the most deadly operations in regard, almost in anything, if you really want to break down the reality of what happened. Jared Kushner. Right, because Jared Kushner was a part of Operation Warp Speed and the thing that killed all the American people. And Moncef Slaoui, as Whitney and I talked about right in the beginning, Anthony Fauci, hooray, Dr. Bricks. Yes, those things don't matter. Now let's talk about an overlap of South Africa and Zionism. And then we'll end with a couple more war points, but I like in particular, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Iran, as well as some points brief of China, but points that end with where we currently are. Now, Day Censored News points this out. Trump's newly confirmed ambassador to South America. Before I read any more, can you guess? Can you guess what trait it is that we all, what the unique and rather the not unique, but rather the word I'm thinking for? Can you guess what the point is involved with this that we're going to get to? He is a Zionist. Of course he is, because that's not a problem, right? It's not a problem that we're watching with what we know about this and what they're currently doing in the world. And if you can't see by now, look, you may not think these people are the ideology is the problem. The fact that they have an ideology that is bent on, it's not America first, let's put it that way, that is completely packed through this administration, claiming to be America first. It's counterintuitive, guys. Listen to what these people are saying about the world. Listen to what many people in his own administration are saying. At best, they're telling you fighting for Israel is America first. And that's been a statement made by many of them. So, Trump's newly confirmed ambassador to South Africa, Zionist Brent Basel, vows to, quote, press South Africa to end proceedings against Israel before the International Court of Justice. The genocide that's been proven in more ways than I've ever seen anything proven in my life, but we're going to stop it. because we're fighting for Israel, because we support the genocide. He doesn't say that, but that's what the point is. Or rather that we don't have the power to stop them or are able to speak up about it because of any number of things. Epstein, blackmail networks, who knows? Quote, what South Africa did in leading the charge against Israel in the ICJ was an injustice, he says. An injustice. That's who these people are. I'll play it for you.
I'm honored to appear before you today as President Trump's nominee to be the next U.S. ambassador to the Republic of South Africa. If confirmed as ambassador, in addition to supporting U.S. citizens in South Africa, I will work on the following priorities. I will communicate our objections to South Africa's geostrategic drift from non-alignment toward our competitors, including Russia, China, and Iran. I'll press South Africa to end proceedings against Israel before the International Court of Justice and to pressure the International Criminal Court prosecutor to discontinue this lawfare, which is belied by Israel's support for the ceasefire in Gaza and commitment to the rules of war throughout.
I mean, guys, do you really think he's this stupid? Do you think this person doesn't know what he's talking about? I mean, these are things that my 5-year-old cousin can tell you are going on. Like these people know. So I just really want you to think about what he's doing right there, rattling off all these things about Israel's commitment to the. I mean, what did he just say? Or the idea of here goes right here,
which is belied by Israel's support for the ceasefire.
Right, their support for the ceasefire where they've killed 414 people. Right.
In Gaza and commitment to
their commitment to the rules of war, clearly, right? Like not using human shields and like not bombing civilians. And, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke. These people are not, I mean, if he's that stupid, it kind of makes sense with why he'd be picked, but I don't believe that's the case. Because that is kind of the case with a lot of Trump's administration, like we'll get to in the end with the new person deciding who's going to get deported. It's not a meritocracy, guys, if they're picking people who are too dumb to know what's going on. It's funny how you would call that out if it was Biden doing it, wouldn't you?
Rules of war throughout the conflict.
How would you use your role as the U.S. ambassador to South Africa to help stand up for our ally Israel in that regard?
What South Africa?
That's Mike Lee, by the way, of course. Look on his Twitter field, look at what he says online to understand why that was the only thing he cares about. What are you going to do to support Israel? Hashtag America First.
Did in leading the charge against Israel in the International Court of Justice was an injustice. It's going to be a top priority because the president has made it a top priority, and the president has told me it's a top priority to do something about that, to get South Africa, not just on that issue.
Just to be clear, you heard what he said, right? He just said Donald Trump told him that it's top priority to stop the investigation of the genocide. There's no other comment needed, guys. I mean, I swear, it's just so, I think we all want so badly to see every single one of these people, whether they're left or right or whatever the reality is, marched in front of the Hague. Actually held accountable for what they know they're doing right now. What this man knows he's doing. That's my opinion, obviously. I don't know what his intent is. I'm of the belief that these people, it's impossible for them to not know what we're talking about. Now, maybe they've got a more nuanced and broken because of propaganda. They don't realize they're absorbing a view. But it doesn't matter if, like I said before, if you take every single thing they've claimed at face value, human shields, Hamas, they've still broken the law more times than I've ever seen in my life. They've still are, by definition, committing a genocide. By definition, starvation campaigns committing famine. There's no way around it. So they know these things. I want these people to be held accountable. Sadly, history shows it probably won't happen. But we should fight for it.
But there are other issues. For example, just recently, South Africa engaged in naval exercises with Iran, the archenemy of Israel.
Oh, how dare they work with other people? You see what I'm saying? He's like clutching his pearls at the fact that South Africa has autonomy. How dare they go and make agreements that we don't approve of? You see what I'm saying? Like, these are authoritarian. These are imperialists. And it's like they don't even realize, it's like they somehow they've convinced themselves that because they're control everything, therefore we can create democracy, but democracy or whatever they think that means, somehow like a stable society. I don't even know how to frame it without making that sound stupid. I guess the only way to frame it would be that through their authoritarian control that they might eventually in the future create a better society, but who cares if we get there? Whatever it is. It's mind blowing to watch this.
If confirmed, I will be taking the president's message to them that we find it intolerable.
Oh, okay.
That they would work against American national interests.
Oh, see, okay, so you're not allowed to have your own decisions. You can't work in your own direction. If, God forbid, it works against what we consider our national interest, somehow they're national interest, but overseas in foreign policy. Yeah, maybe you want to look up some definitions of what national means, bud.
Our alliance with Israel is ironclad. They are one of our greatest friends in the world. The president's going to stand by Israel, and that means we
Yeah, regardless. Crimes or not, genocide or not, that's the point. He said that many times.
have to address this with South Africa.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Gross. It's wild to me. What they're doing is very obvious. And, they must have something in the back of their mind. Maybe I'll end up getting held accountable. But see, it's a juice worth the squeeze point. They're going, this is a lot of power. If I play ball, sort of like Kash Patel's office reached out to Massey and said, you better play ball or we're going to investigate you. That's how this runs. And he's thinking, okay, well, I'm going to play ball. I'm going to gain a lot of power and influence, probably get a lot of money. And if odds speak to, if looking at the odds or anything, which most of these criminals get away with it. So I'm going to roll the dice. That's what I think they're doing, guys. This is why I do what I do, because at the very least, I'm going to put them on spot. I'm going to put them on blast. This is who this person is. And maybe some people see it, and maybe it graces the conversation of one of these larger platforms so they can maybe get some reach around it. That's a bad way to say that. A reach for it. But my God, guys, it's just so frustrating because it seems like it always goes the same way. But doesn't mean we should stop fighting. I don't believe that's ever the answer. Now, since we just talked about Zionism, and if you don't understand this, we've talked about it many times, including last show, we're not talking about Jewish people here. There is an overlap. There's even an overlap to Jewish supremacy, which is important to make. Make the point every single time because it matters. That even the leading Israeli human rights group will tell you this is apartheid. They call it a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. But the point to be made is it's not about Jewish people alone. In fact, it's not about that. It's about Zionism. The Judaism part of it is an abuse of Zionism. And that's why you have Orthodox Jews around the world who are screaming about this, saying Zionism does not represent us. Zionism is a racist ideology that has taken control. As Avi Shalem will tell you, Zionism is racism. He's an Israeli Jew who is a very prominent academic. I've covered all of this stuff. The point in saying all of this is it's important to understand that when we call these things out, it's not some secret hatred against a certain religion. It's not the point. In fact, if you look at my work, if you care to actually understand my opinion, you'll see that I've spent my entire career fighting for anybody who is being suppressed or stepped on or some people without a voice. And recently, that was a lot of Jewish organizations who were being accused of very terrible things because they were calling out the genocide. It's very important to understand that. Now, in this point, it's also because I brought this up recently. Most people don't seem to realize, and this really does make this very clear. Theodor Herzl, who is the founder of Zionism, or one of the main founders, he was an atheist. I don't know how that doesn't explain everything, but even more so, guess who else were atheists? Some of the leading historical examples of Zionism and who created it, because this was never about this. It was about control. That's why, as Dan Cohen has covered in our interview and on his own work, that Zionists at this time aligned themselves with Nazi Germany before and during the final solution. Meaning, you can't claim that Zionism was created to fight and protect against that because they were literally aligning with that group. You can look it up on Wikipedia. It's just insane. But see, I say these things and somehow people, even people you wouldn't expect, somehow think that we're talking about Jewish people because it's like most people have been kind of trained to only hear certain things when certain words are framed. But I'm saying it very clearly. Now, here's the point. Are there atheist Zionists? Yes, Grok will tell you, but I've covered this many times from many source material documents. There are atheist Zionists, and they've been a significant part of the Zionist movement ever since its inception. I mean, so if you're going to make it about Judaism, how do you possibly explain that? At the very least, it's an ideology that then overlaps with those religions, which is what I've been saying, Christianity included. But it's using them and just to cut the chase. It originated 19th century predominantly as a secular national movement, meaning not religious, guys. That's literally how this started. And key examples, Theodor Herzl, widely regarded as the father of modern political Zionism, was secular, meaning not religious, and often described as non-religious or atheist. That's the case. Ben David Goron, first prime minister, was a self-proclaimed atheist. Does this get ridiculous? Okay, claim Wiseman, Israel's first president, an atheist. So the first prime minister, the first president, the founder, and then even Jabotinsky, who was one of the most extreme foundational elements, founder of the revisionist Zionism, a precursor to the current modern right-wing Zionism right now in Israel. He was agnostic or non-religious. I mean, isn't that just profoundly stupid that we can't have an honest conversation about this? And you say these things on Twitter and you call the racists because this is a floundering ideological political control structure that is absolutely breaking down in front of our eyes. And these people are dangerous. So too are the government that we have in this country. And I think it's part of the same problem. And it's not just about Zionism, but you have to understand that what it is cannot be decoupled from what we're dealing with today. You have to be honest about this. I'll include all this as well. Now, the reason that's important, guys, first of all, we're talking about the Israel overlap, but because this is playing a factor in almost every one of these conversations, whether it's just a foreign policy overlap between allies or something much darker. You can decide. Fox News, this is about Ukraine. Recently, and really the larger point is about the so-called peace president and how this is very much not that. And on top of that, that it's because of a larger agenda. Russia claims President Putin's residence was attacked by Ukraine. Now, we're going to read from antiwar.com. This is not new. We've talked about this ourselves. Both that they've already done this many times in generally using drones to attack in Russia. But we covered this. And for the life of me, I couldn't find this today. And I showed this on the show before. If you remember, please let me know what show it was. The UK Times, just the Times, in the UK, put out an article arguing that they could prove that there were U.S. pilots, U.S. ships, or rather jets and planes, I think planes, taking Ukrainian soldiers into Russia to conduct strikes. Now, of course, it could have been wrong, but the point is that's what they were claiming. And I thought it was a profound point to say, look, Putin is not under the illusion that the U.S. is not involved. It hasn't been from the beginning. And because they've stated this. That's why I laugh when Jones is like, Russia said they're going to respond with nuclear weapons in World War III. It's like, you're such a joke, man. That's a response saying we can respond. We reserve the right to use that response. It's basically what it is every time. The point is, yes, we are in a pretty heightened state of war, but that's not a new change. And historically, Putin has made it clear he knows the U.S. is involved. So it's just it's meant to make you distracted and to raise the fever pitch. But this, his home, if it happened, is a pretty big step. Putin tells President Trump his home was struck. Ukrainian President Zelensky basically said it was fake. That didn't happen. Typical lies. So here's The Guardian. Zelensky says Moscow is trying to derail peace talks, which, that's certainly possible, but historically that's been the opposite. It's been very clear this entire time. Here's what it says. As Russian foreign minister claims Ukraine targeted president's home in Novgorod. Oh, that's the next one I want to look at. It's about the overlap of Donbass, which is what I told you was going to happen. But my point here is that so far, it has been obvious that there's been a largely Ukrainian resistance to giving up certain territory, which is what I said was likely going to happen. Russia seemed intent on being able to draw certain lines and put an end to this a while ago. Now, they could have been lying about that. I don't take any of them at face value. But if you just look at the actions, if you look at the group they're working with, the Azov movement and what they've actually been doing, it's the same like Zionism conversation. It's obvious what this group is, guys. They're terrible, neo-Nazi fascist elements. And Israel and the U.S. have been supporting them for decades. Not new, right? It's the same conversation everywhere. We need to start to come to terms with that. The point, though, is that whether or not they're the one responsible, I'm sure Putin could be just as responsible, but looking at the full picture, I think it's most likely that it happened like it sounds it did. And he knew the U.S. would back him, and so they failed at their effort to take Putin out and argue, well, they lied about it, and he wants to ruin the peace talks, which it seems Zelensky's the one holding up. So it doesn't really line up, guys. Here's antiwar.com. Russia's Lavrov accuses Ukraine of firing 91 drones at Putin's residence. This is from today. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Monday that Ukrainian forces fired 91 kamikaze drones at President Putin's residence in Russia. Lavrov said that Russian air defenses intercepted all of the Ukrainian drones, but warned Moscow would respond. Now, you could argue right there this was a pretense to carry out an attack that they already had planned. That's possible too, saying that targets for retaliatory strikes have already been determined. Now, as of yet, I haven't seen that response. It might have happened since we went live. Such reckless action will not go unanswered, he says. Now, if it did happen, then you think Trump wouldn't respond if his home was targeted by drones? According to Yuri Ushakov, an aide to Putin, President Trump spoke with the leader by phone on Monday. so this was today, and said he was, quote, shocked by the attack. Now, of course, they could be lying about what Trump said, but, that seems like it's something Trump would do. The U.S. president, according to Putin, was shocked by the news and expressed outrage, stating that he could not have imagined such crazy actions on the part of Kiev. Now, even if he doesn't mean it, that's the kind of thing they do. They schmooze each other. They act like you're on. So at the end of the day, I think my gut would tell me that this is not something they were involved with. This is a internal Zelensky striving for power at a point where he sees himself losing it. That's what it feels like. But it could be a number of things, including that this was an attempt on Putin's life by Israel, the United States. That doesn't, my gut doesn't go in that direction, but that's obviously possible. Ukrainian forces have previously targeted the Kremlin with drones. Yes. And Ukrainian intelligence officials have threatened to target Putin for assassination. So, the groundwork is there. They've already done this many times in regard to drones into the Kremlin and in Russia, and they've threatened to assassinate him. So to act like this is unfounded is kind of insulting. But it says Trump said after the talks that the issue of territory is still unresolved, as Zelensky, as I told you, refuses to cede the rest of Donbass, a key Russian demand. So they're the one holding up the whole thing. So what happened when this first came out and Trump said first, and then 24 hours? Nobody with a brain thought that was going to happen. We hope, and that didn't, inevitably. And clearly this has not gone anywhere, even though he claims this is one of the wars he's stopped. But I said at the secondary part of this, where there was, an ongoing negotiation, that what's likely going to happen is that Russia would be willing to basically allow this to stop if they got back those areas, Donbass included, Crimea being left alone. But I said at the time, if you remember, I guarantee that largely the Azov movement, but Zelensky pretending to be the leader through all of it, would not agree to that. The Azov movement does not want to give up this territory, and they're the ones arguably in control through pressure and threats, and I think through outside forces, if you want my real opinion. And so here we are. And what the point is not about being right. The point is that Trump's, I'm going to solve all this. And I said, well, that's likely not going to happen. And everyone, oh, you just don't believe. And now it's not happening. And so then they're going to go, well, it's their fault. They didn't do it. No, it's the same point you could have seen in the beginning. The reality is they want to sell you on their accomplishments before they ever get there. They want to take credit for something they never did and then flounder it and blame it on somebody else. It seems to be their go-to. Marjorie Taylor Greene criticizes Trump's meetings with Zelensky, saying, can we just do America? I love it because it's important to think about. Greene said on Sunday, called for President Trump to only focus on America's needs, which would actually be America first, as the president meets with Zelensky and Netanyahu. And she says, Zelensky today, Netanyahu tomorrow, which is more right than you think. Can we just do America? She says. Well, before we get to, we're going to have a few more points, but the reality is that right now, today, Donald Trump is meeting with Netanyahu in Florida. Now, I want to include this because it seems to be a point that is lost on a lot of people still. The Israeli government has been funding what's going on in Ukraine well before 2018. But here's a document or an article from Haaretz. Rights groups demand Israel stop arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's how funny this, how ridiculous this all is. Sort of like entire articles from all of corporate media about how there's Nazis all over Ukraine and then pivoting to what Nazis? You guys are racist. It's just insane. And the only reason I think that happened is because the agenda pivoted, which happens all the time. Originally, the argument, which I think I was proving, is that with January 6th overlap and all of it, was to create the idea that Russia was what was responsible for the Nazis and then claim that from that it had overflowed into the United States and use that to blame Russia. It completely spun out and they lost control of that narrative. And so it shifted. That's what I genuinely think happened. So in this case, they were funding them like they were a lot of these groups. And I think it's ridiculous. And you can see right here, Azov militia, now the Azov movement. And even then it was the Azov movement as it overtook the government and police force and everything else. They lie about all of this, as well as the fact, as we covered on 2022. Not just Azov, documents prove the CIA has been cultivating fascism in Ukraine since at least 1948. I forget his first name all of a sudden. Alex Rubinstein was doing great work on this long before I was covering it. And on top of that, it's important to recognize that Loomer, think about the timing now, guys. Loomer, when this, right before this all spun out with October 7th in Israel, she grabbed onto this argument and put out a very truncated version that just so happened to leave out the Israel involvement. That just so happened to leave out things like Kolomoisky. at the time the head of the World Jewish Congress, who was, of course, also who ran the 1+1 media station in Ukraine, which became Zelensky's cabinet, and also just happened to be the primary funder of the Azov movement. No big deal there, right? It's so obvious, but she tried to make it about something else entirely. She tried to co-opt the story to hide the most important part. And I think you see why now because of where we are. I think it's very important to think about. So this is obviously important because it goes back to what they were trying to create all the way back then. And I'll include the document itself if you want to read through it. It's called Project Aerodynamic. It's all right here of building this unit and why they were doing it, and the fact that they were literally funding a guy named Mykola Lebed, who is a actual Nazi war criminal, who they were funding in Ukraine, but also set him up with an office in New York and let him produce media for American eyes. This is what your government's always been doing. It's right in here. You can read it all, guys. Now, Venezuela, also an obvious agenda to the larger global, whether AI or just geostrategic control or, oil, gold, lithium, all are important to their agenda. There's an update on Venezuela. Trump claims U.S. struck facility in Venezuela campaign, but offers no details. Now, this came out when they hadn't been really developed. President Trump casually told a radio show last week that U.S., quote, knocked out a big facility, seemingly in Venezuela as part of the militarized pressure campaign, which, guys, this is not about narco trafficking. This is not about anything other than they've always coveted control over this territory. And now this is just the new narrative. He says, we just knocked out, I don't know if you read or saw, they have a big plant or a facility where they send where the ships come from 2 nights ago. So that means they literally militarily attacked Venezuela. So welcome to the new war, guys, which has always been really going on. Hit them really hard, he said. Here is a clip. Of course, Nick's order going, yay, the United States has just conducted its first land strike in Venezuela. This same clown's over here going, peace, president, all the way. The military took out a drug facility. Oh, is that what he did? You got to love how these rebels fighting the deep state will just blindly take at face value what the government tells them happened and what the genocide committing ally next to him tells you happened. Very good journalism, guys. Welcome to the new media. Well, down here, Adam says, go on. He says, go on, criticize it. Or are you just a stenographer? Well, we know the answer to that. But here's the clip. Hear it from himself.
On Iran, if Iran will not have a deal, if Iran will continue with their ballistic missiles and also nuclear weapons.
If they will continue with the missiles, yes. The nuclear, fast. Okay? One will be yes, absolutely. The other was, we'll do it immediately.
Mr. President, on Iran, if Iran will not have a deal, if Iran will continue with their ballistic missiles and...
Wait a minute. Okay, hold on. Is that Twitter that gave me the wrong? No, that's the one he has on there. Damn it. See, I knew I shouldn't have grabbed. There's another one I had. I don't want to try to find it now. There is a clip where he actually says this. So just so in case you're confused, he writes this about Venezuela, but he posted the clip where he's talking about the next conversation, which is Iran. So I don't know whether that's his mistake or whether that's Twitter doing that. I don't know. But either way, the point about this is you don't have to hear him say it. The reality is that Donald Trump is claiming to have bombed and attacked Venezuela, as we just showed you. But there is a clip of him discussing certain points. The relevant understanding is that they have been long-term going after Venezuela. But the next point was going to be about Iran. I'm confused by why that's what's posted there. And I did have another version of that, but I went with this because of Adam's comment, and now I don't want to go find the video. Anyway, the point is supporting the idea of a unilateral, illegal, not approved by Congress, bombing campaign in a civilian location in Venezuela. But yay, America first. Here's Combat pointing out Nicaragua's president. He says, as Don Quixote said, if they bark, it's because we're moving forward. He says they've been exposed. We said they wanted oil. And what did they do? Steal oil tankers. They are thieves in suits. Now, probably for their government too, quite frankly, but the reality is he's right. Look, they just see the last oil tanker they seized didn't even have a legal justification. It was just connected to Venezuela. I mean, it's blind piracy, guys. So going on to Iran, same conversation. This one more than ever is straightforward being driven by Iran, or excuse me, by Israel, which has so too as every other one of them. Trump says the U.S. would back strikes against Iran's missile program. You know, the program that Trump just said they completely obliterated and said they'd barely be able to restart in the next 20 years or whatever he said. But now they're back to it. Yeah, the thing they never had in the first place, right? That's why it perfectly makes sense. Speaking alongside Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump threatens to knock down Iran's attempts to rebuild their nuclear capabilities. Just so it's clear, Donald Trump next to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago, December 29th, 2025. So what is that, like the 14th time they've met? Because that's not at all a weird thing. Or the idea that Netanyahu just comes in and out of the United States as he's committed genocide, even though he's supposed to be an international war criminal. No big deal. It says, now I hear that Iran is trying to build up again. That's Trump. And if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. What do you mean you hear? Did Netanyahu tell you that? I mean, guys, I can't stop pointing this out in this moment. And as always, it's kind of probably both. But this is either just like an embarrassing level of naivety, or he's not able to say no. And this is the only way he makes himself look like he's in control. Kind of think it's kind of a little bit of both. But the reality, now you hear Iran's doing that. I mean, does evidence play a factor into that? Because it never does with Iran. They never, ever prove what they're saying. And in fact, actual evidence, actually to the level of proof when it comes to the older conversation, maybe now it's different. You could prove that they weren't doing what they said they were doing. Trump's State Department said that they weren't going after nuclear weapons recently. I mean, it just becomes absurd. It says, when asked whether the U.S. would back an Israeli attack against Iran targeting Tehran's missile program, Trump said, quote, if they will continue with the missiles. The missiles, yes. That was that clip. We'll play it again now. The nuclear fast. He goes, okay, one will be yes, absolutely. The other is we'll do it immediately. So it's confusing for you. I think it's meant to be muddled. He's actually arguing if they just continue to make regular missiles, we'll bomb them. But if they go for nuclear, then we're going to bomb them right away. So now apparently, as it makes it even more clear, now apparently they're not even allowed to make ballistic missiles because they're bad guys. Well, guess what? They're not allowed to do that. They're also not allowed to say you can't work on a civilian nuclear program or even nuclear weapons for that matter, seeing as though every country in the world is allowed, including Israel, are doing so. By what legal reality are you claiming you could just dictate what other countries are allowed to do? That's what actual liberty and freedom is, guys, despite what your governments have told you about these people, almost all entirely false and wrong. This is insane. So the U.S. just gets to go, you could do it, you can't do it. No, you're not allowed over there. Well, we don't want to be the policeman of the world, Trump famously once said. Quote, we cannot allow Iran to produce ballistic missiles because they could overwhelm the Iron Dome. Right. Because that's all we care about, right? We can't allow Iran to be able to overwhelm Israel's defense systems. So we're going to illegally and unilaterally tell them they can't build weapons. Because that makes sense, right? So they're going to be defenseless forever. And then we won't take advantage of that, we promise. I mean, guys, these guys are criminals. On the face of the conversation, they're literally telling you what they're doing. Well, that thing is a crime. Wild. He says it's a major threat. Quote, if they want to make a deal, that's much smarter, Trump says. You know, they could have made a deal the last time, when they made a deal and then Trump ignored it. That was the last time. And before we went through a big attack on them and they decided not to make a deal, what he actually refers to there is when they were literally bombing and coercing and Iran was threatening and Trump was going, we're going to do whatever. If you don't do this, we're going to bomb you. And then go, why don't you make a deal? While you're holding a gun to their head. How about you, Trump? If someone goes, I'm going to murder your family unless you make a deal with me, you're going to go, okay, let's make a deal. It's ignorant, guys. That's ridiculous. So the reality, though, is we're going to go all the way back to the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal, right? As we've talked about ad nauseum, because it's just like every other conversation, very easy to prove. In the deal, if I remember correctly, I don't know, Article 26, I could be wrong. It says explicitly, because Iran knew what who they were dealing with. If the U.S. government violates, unilaterally pulls out of this deal, we can continue the legal civilian enrichment of uranium, which they agreed to not do and provably did not do while this was in place. Donald Trump, either stupidly taking Israel's word or knowing they were lying, said they're making illegal stuff and pulled out of the deal. Guess what was never proven? Guess what was actually proven to not be the case? What Trump was claiming. So he pulls out of the deal. Now, whatever, even if you think they're lying about it, the point is that the deal was broken because they pulled out of it, because Trump could have used the deal itself to force them to compliance if he wanted to. And they pulled out, and Iran said, well, there you go. It's right there. We're complying with the deal, like almost to this very day, if it was even still, if it was not defunct. And the problem is that they then said, look, they're making uranium. and use the deal that was in the right path as the proof that they were breaking the rules. Like, you can't make up that kind of dishonesty and stupidity almost, because they knew you could just look. But I also think it's because they know how, I guess, ineffectual, or rather just vulnerable their position was. So the peace president is going, yeah, we'll bomb Iran again. No big deal, right? If Israel needs us to, America first. Yeah, I read those, just making sure. So here is, the same clip. This is the other one. This is the one about Iran that I wanted you, or the same one, rather. I wanted to play the one about Venezuela before, but the point about that, I think, should be clear. Glenn Greenwald responds to the same point about what Trump just said, and said Netanyahu has been signaling that he wants to bomb Iran again. No need. He already has Trump promising to do it for Israel. See how that works? Not just if Iran tries to build nukes. I thought their facilities were obliterated, right? See, Glenn sees exactly what I'm talking about. But even if they replace their ballistic missiles, which, by the way, they don't need to replace them. They still have some. I mean, look, there was a clear argument about what was destroyed, but as far as I can tell, it was not everything. So as soon as they simply decide to make a move, they can go, missiles, they violated what? Your arbitrary line you drew in the sand that has no legal standing? Sure. That's what's happening, guys. You know, you have to really look at these things and understand that the person you think you are fighting for freedom is either completely out of his league, snowed, no ideas being played, or is a bad guy and part of it, or is unable to push back because of some blackmail or whatever else. I just don't know how we can look at it another way. But I'm open to other possibilities. Let me know your facts. Iran reportedly developing chemical, biological missile warheads as protests spread. Yep. That's Fox News, December 29th. It's almost like clockwork, isn't it? Now, guess what, guys? Guess what? Iran is reportedly developing chemical and biological warheads, even as they continue, fueled on by collapsing currency and soaring inflation. Oh, yeah. Why? Because U.S. sanctions. But their fault. According to an exclusive report published by Iran International, a group that's completely manipulated by outside forces, including Israel. Like every other location they have, guys. That's what's insane about this. The facts, when you want to look into it, are completely nothing. Sources, Iran, Israel's inside intelligence. That's what we're talking about. You know how many times they've been caught lying about this? Every single time in my experience. But yeah, biological, chemical, because the reason they're now selling you that narrative is because Trump just said ballistic missiles. And you know what you can put on top ballistic missile? Chemical, biological warheads. Not nuclear. So now you're just making it about weapons. Why? Because they know you can't prove nuclear weapons, because they're not doing that. Now, here's a clip that I think is relevant for you to see after this, with Trump telling you how many times he's like, basically Netanyahu just won't stop calling me for weapons. Imagine saying this in this climate.
I mean, Bibi would call me so many times, can you get me this weapon, that weapon? Some of them I never heard of, Bibi, and I made them. But we'd get them here, wouldn't we? And they are the best. But you used them well. It also takes people that know how to use them. And you obviously used them very well. But so many that Israel became strong and powerful, which ultimately led to peace. That's what led to peace.
Can you believe that? Oh, that's where we are now? Peace? Right? Oh, and then you know why that's funny? Because Netanyahu, I guarantee, took offense to that, because that implies that Trump is the reason that they're powerful. This is the inside game that people don't often point out. There's little slights back and forth. These people are always doing this back and forth. Nothing is sacred. But it's funny to me because at the end of the day, or not funny, what peace are you talking about? Like, even if you're pretending a ceasefire, that's not peace, not done yet. That's a pause. And at this point in time, that wasn't the case. This guy is just so desperate to make you think he's winning while he's failing you spectacularly.
And you obviously used them very well. But so many that Israel became strong and powerful, which ultimately led to peace. That's what led to peace.
Oh, and then, of course, he's saying, because strength is the only way, power and weapons and war is the only way to peace. No, it's not. Monsters want you to think that. Why? Because monsters are violent. And that's what they do. Sociopaths and psychopaths use violence and coercion. That's all they know. And as I said with this, on October 14th, I said, hey, Alex Jones, is this what a peace president does? October 14th. Far, far more obvious today. This one is a clip of Donald Trump telling you that he's going to give Netanyahu a pardon. President Trump says a pardon for Netanyahu is on the way. Sorry, I thought I had this downloaded. I mean, just think about this, guys. Like, imagine this in this conversation with what he must know that we can see. It's videos and statements like this that make me lean in the direction that Trump is not in control. Because, I mean, look, he's not dumb enough to think that he must know how bad this looks. He must know that saying this right now is going to hurt his political direction. You know what it'll do, though? It'll help Netanyahu's. So you're willing to do it for him at your expense. What does that tell you? Here is Donald Trump telling you that there's a pardon coming for Netanyahu.
If we didn't wipe out with our beautiful B-2 bombers, if we didn't, and we sent a lot of Tomahawks in there also, by the way, from a submarine.
And what about the pardon that the president of Israel needs to give the prime minister?
A pardon? I think he will. How do you not? He's a wartime prime minister who's a hero. How do you not give a pardon? You know, I think it's a very hard thing not to do it.
Sorry, I was muted. The point, guys, is think about what he just said right there. The idea that, well, I'm in power, right? That's not that here's evidence that shows he's not a criminal, right? No. I'm just in power. He's in power. He's a wartime power. He's a president. You should pardon him, of course. That's what powerful people think. That's what authoritarian imperialists think. I'm in power. You can't hold me accountable. I mean, really think about that. If you were going to pardon him, your argument should be evidence-based about why he's not that criminal. I just think that's so transparent. And this, I mean, it's whether it's desperation because he knows he might be next or because that's just how they see the world. We could not be further apart. The chasm between the people like that and people like you, I mean, I can't even think of an analogy. The Grand Canyon, it is insane. You are on a different planet than these people.
I spoke to the president, and he tells me it's on its way. You can't do better than that, right? Please.
Right. So the point is Trump is petitioning them to give him a pardon. One of the most obvious genocide committing heads of state in history on live stream. Not even just that, but him stating Amalek, kill them all, known in Palestine. I mean, just very clear intent, which is almost always the hardest part to prove. But Trump said, let him go because he's in power, right? Right? Other powerful people in the world, we shouldn't do this to each other. That's the message being sent. Netanyahu announces, weirdly timed right after that, it's just a coincidence though, Netanyahu announces Israel is awarding President Trump the Israel Prize. Imagine that. Imagine in this time, again, in this climate, it's like Netanyahu, I'm going to give you the Genocide Prize. Hooray! I don't want the Genocide Prize. That's what you should be saying to this. I don't want the Israel Prize. I don't want to be associated with that, but that's what's happening because they're just thrusting themselves into everything so they can't be held accountable. It is the country's highest cultural honor and has not been won by a non-Israeli in nearly 80 years. So Trump, who's allowing them to commit genocide with no consequences, yay, Israel Prize. It's just crazy to me. Of course, on top of that, on top of Trump meeting with Netanyahu, right, today in Florida, guess what else is happening? Netanyahu, I'm currently meeting in Florida with the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. Just making the rounds, guys. I mean, look at this. Why is this even happening? Why in the world is it so commonplace for this man who's committing a genocide, who is literally under indictment by his own government, who is currently a war criminal in the eyes of the entire international community, to just cavalierly step in and just have insider meetings with the president and the inner war cabinet? I mean, that's insane. The only way you can take that is that these people are also involved or begrudgingly have to do this because their president says so. Torah Jews, by the way, one of the groups I've often point out, an Orthodox Jewish community that is very large and worldwide, Benjamin Netanyahu is the prime instigator of anti-Semitism, says this Jewish organization. By exploiting our faith and politicizing anti-Semitism, he deliberately tries to impose collective responsibility for his actions on all Jews. That's my point every time, that he is doing that. And then when other people then point to that, they call them racist, even though it's not true in the first place. It is clearly Zionism abusing this conversation, even though there's a Jewish supremacy that has been woven into it. And it says, help us call out the evils and dangers of Zionism. Torah Jews. You know, it's like having Jewish organizations, which were predominantly responsible for the campus protests, put on the protests, and then having Zionists call them anti-Semites. And we pretend that's about Judaism. On top of that, Elon Musk. Benjamin Netanyahu held a call with Elon Musk focused on artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles. Great. Remember the Mossad guy? We've got infiltration in every device in your country. Welcome to your AI vehicle. Discussing future legislation and plans to position Israel as a global leader in artificial intelligence. Now, it's a report. My point, though, is that I think on the surface, whether this is a statement or not, that I think that's part of what's happening. Janice Girl shares a great 11-minute clip that you should watch. The future legislation is a 20-year grift. She said, this tweet says, the U.S.-Israel Defense Partnership Act, which we'll do a later focus on, creates an open door for handing America's tech crown to Israel on U.S. taxpayers' dime. So when Trump says, we'll do that, we'll bomb Iran, we'll get you a pardon, like this is what we're talking about. It's the same thing. So in this case, the U.S. and your money is building out some AI monstrosity that might very well be handed over to Israel. Check out my latest article, she says, dissecting Israel's latest scheme. I create a video version for those who prefer audio to read it. So consider that possibility and where that may go. Now, one quick point, you might have seen the major military package, you know, America first, more spending, right? Going to Taiwan, which you can decide whether you feel one way or the other about it, but you have to understand. Take Hawaii, for example. Take Puerto Rico. Take any number of these locations. Hawaii is the best example because I lived there for years. And I know firsthand from locals, even from people in government, people in the police, they do not see themselves as American. They see themselves as an occupied territory. Now, maybe that's changed over the years that I haven't been there, but it's very prominent when I was there. And so they operate as such. Now, they comply, but ultimately, there's even like an underling kind of like, you know, tribal government that still exists that they just aren't acknowledged. The point, though, is that they don't believe they should be overtaken by the United States. Now, if China was to say, we support Hawaii's independence and we'll give you weapons to fight the United States, what do you think the U.S. would do? Even if Hawaii was going, I want that, China, come help me. This is the argument there because Taiwan, the influence from the U.S. has been there for a long time, but let's just even say it's completely organic. Taiwan is saying we want to separate. Imagine if Texas was saying we want to break away from the United States, because there's been movements that have there's been prominent conversations about that. The U.S. will never allow it because at one point, maybe even still, it was one of the most profitable states. But the point is all the same, is that there's an argument for places wanting to do that, but they'll never allow it. My question is, if another outside power came in and said, we'll support Texas, we'll support Hawaii in doing so, would they be wrong? It's a thought process you should go through, because where we are now, you damn well know what our government would do. So in this case, I'm not saying, I support anything, any entity, if it's organic and genuinely what people in the area want to break away for their own independence. I think that's important. Our own Constitution claims that's the reality, but our government no longer cares about the Constitution. My point is, in this case, U.S. funding Taiwan and not, as far as I could tell, there's no like genuine international articles or presentations about actual independence. That's not what's happening. You just have the U.S. using the situation, going, we support them, and then funding them with arms because it's used against China. It's used to destabilize and cause if there's more going on, then I actually want to put it a different way. They don't care about Taiwanese independence. They do not. It's about using them, just like every other conversation. That's my opinion. So all that to say is that when they dump funding into them or weapons, and then act like it's outrageous, China would have a problem with that, it's a joke. So China responds. China warns the United States. It says, if you want war, you will get war. If you want to destroy China, you will be destroyed. China will not fire the first shot, but China will not allow you to fire the second shot. That was Victor Gao, president of China's energy sector. Now, not government, but the point is that there's clearly a lot of sentiment like this coming from a lot of different high-level parts of their society. And what I think is important to this, and be clear, there has been government statements and responses, is that ultimately, I think this is about creating schisms. And what's interesting is I don't think for 1 second the U.S. even believes they can take this on. So I'm not sure how this will play out, but is this a peace president? Is doing this in any way about anything other than the international, globalist, technocratic Zionist agenda that we're all watching play out? I want you to ask that question. Lastly, coming home. I went over this briefly yesterday, and we'll make this quick to end. I want to make this point again that I didn't make last time because I was just rushing to finish. Trump hires beauty salon owner to decide who to ban from the U.S., says this conservative platform, Daily Beast. Okay. So, hypothetically speaking, if this was the Biden administration, right? And Biden had hired this person to be, I don't know, a pilot or anything else, what do you think, what do you know the Elon Musks and that whole thing would say? It's a woke hire. It's a woman. Remember when the whole pilot thing happened? And they literally tried to make the case that because she was a female, that it was a work. And it turned out she was one of the highest credentialed in her class. And they all just, oh, but it's still woke. It's just insane, the partisanship today. I'm not, maybe she's the point is, from my perspective, when you look into this, do you really believe that she is the best for the position? Do you really believe that she has the most credentials? A beauty salon owner? I'm not going to say maybe she's super intelligent. I'm just going to say, if we're really going to talk about a meritocracy, you'd want somebody who was very intelligent, very well versed in the job, somebody who understands the policy, the law. Do you think this salon owner has all that? Maybe. It's certainly possible. I don't believe it, though. And I believe the reality is this is another person who is willing to do whatever they need to do to please the team. Like Bondi, like Noam, like every one of them. And you've seen that on display in embarrassing ways. So I want you to think about that. Is this would be called a woke hire simply because she's a woman if it was in anybody else on the Democrat side? It's just funny how easy that is to point out. But that's not the point today. The point is about immigration and the war on you and how clearly it's been aimed at you for quite a while. This is just an overlapping point to the immigration discussion when you're hiring someone like this who's going to rubber stamp whatever the team wants and get rid of whoever Trump says. But we already saw this. Cristian Holmes, commander at large, says U.S. citizenship need to carry proof of, says U.S. citizens need to carry proof of citizenship. No, that's simply flat out wrong. That's unconstitutional. It's illegal. Plenty of times that's been reiterated. And here she is, stupidly saying that. Now, whether that's because Trump told her to, or she doesn't know any better. Kind of both, probably. But at the end of the day, that's un-American. That's alarming. That's criminal. And they're aiming at you, guys. Citizens. You must take this for what it says. You, not the immigrant, not the brown, you, the U.S. citizen. You are required to now prove that you are who you say you are. That's never been what we believe here. It's against the law, in fact. And here's an example. I played him before. Just this is somebody going, you need to prove your citizenship or you're going to be arrested. ICE to a U.S. citizen who eventually proved it. And they look, but they forced you're making them break the law. Okay. Here is a Border Patrol agent getting caught using a warrant that was not real. And when the lady was smartly enough to was going, look, that's not signed. There's no date on it. There's not an address put. That's up. You printed out from online. Guess what? They walked away. Those are criminals, guys. They knew what they were doing. They deliberately faked this for some kind of effort, probably meeting a quota, which we know exists, and they got caught and they left. Does that sound like the heroes in the scenario? No, it does not. Now, we already talked about this. This article's from August. Pentagon planning quick reaction force. And we told you at the time, imagine if Biden was doing that. Imagine if it was Obama who said we were going to have National Guard or otherwise military presence that was placed all over the country for quick react, which, by the way, to a degree has sort of been there, but not like this. And even then, I wasn't okay with that. And I've called things like that before. Even like the fusion centers. I mean, all this stuff we've always called out. So those that try to frame it like we only care because of Trump are just dumb. It's not true. In this case, this is the extension that we were telling you about. This is a slow creeping martial law. And it's obvious because it's more than National Guard. It's been Marines. It's been all sorts of overlapping forces. And this is all over the country now. So when this came out, it was a couple, it'll just be small things and only for immigration. That's what they all said. Well, guess what, guys? Nope. Here it is from the 25th of August. Additional measures to address the crime emergency, in the District of Columbia. So it's about DC. But guess what, guys? It extended onward, and now it still continues. And the point shall immediately begin ensuring that each state's Army National Guard and Air National Guard are resource trained, organized, and available to assist federal, state, and local enforcement in quelling civil disturbances. Well, since when did you simply protesting become worthy of deploying the national? Well, and there's one point, I think it was Kent State? And we know how that went down. The reality is today, that's supposed to be something different. People don't get shot for protesting unless the government creates those circumstances or there is actual crimes being committed, neither of which are happening right now with what I can see. In coordination with the respective adjutants general, the Secretary of Defense shall designate an appropriate number of each state's trained National Guard. And the reason they're doing that is because they're trying to avoid the pussy comitatus accusation. Members to be reasonably available for rapid mobilization for such purposes. Quick reaction force. Now, here we are where Trump's acknowledging that. This is from yesterday.
Secretary Hegseth, sir, a memo circulating on social media details the establishment of a National Guard response force that's going to be trained in crowd control and civil unrest and deployed in all 50 states by April of 2026. Can you verify the authenticity of that memo, and do you have any more information on the operations?
Right. All 50 states. In what world does that sound like some kind of a measured response to immediate situations? That is a statement of martial law. We are going to have military presence everywhere in the country. Remember what that used to be called? Banana Republic.
I'm not going to answer particulars on something that may be in the planning.
Even though it's been public for a long time. That's Hegseth stepping lightly to avoid getting called out, saying the wrong thing that Trump gets mad about. You're going to avoid stating something that we can prove has been out for months? See what I'm saying? Like they're concerned, I think.
I'm not going to answer particulars on something that may be in the planning process, but we definitely do have multiple layers of National Guard response forces, whether it's in each state.
That is not the question. You've completely avoided, we got things like that somewhere and around and kind of, no, you're doing it and it's every state and it is the reality. And you're just very clumsily, in fact, trying to avoid answering that question. What does that tell you?
Whether it's regionally, whether it's Title 10 active duty, whether it's Washington, D.C.
None of those things apply to what he just said, which is, in overlapping points, but every one of those things have specific circumstances, timelines, not an ongoing forever, every state deployment that's there if you need them. That's not the point. That's martial law, guys. I don't care what you want to pretend it's something else. That is what that becomes. That is, whether National Guard or not, they're skirting the reality by not crossing state lines, which they've already done throughout immigration. So they've already broke that law. It just kills me how obvious this is.
We've got a lot of different ways that constitutionally and legally we can employ Title 10 and Title 32 forces, and we will do so when necessary.
Of course, because they obviously care so much about the Constitution that they've rapidly and, in what ways have they not violated the Constitution? Every main argument we've ever made, they have violated, from search and seizure, from free speech. Guys, you go down the list. But now we're going to make sure. What he means by that is sort of like Trump. Well, Article 2, I can do what I want, right? Or when asked Bondi, or I think it was Leave It, said in regard to this, we're going to find out whether we can deport American citizens. We're going to see if it's illegal. So what she means is we're going to find a way to do what we want to do. That's not the same thing. And these people are dangerous. And it's no different than the left and the right, guys. They're all doing the same things with different flavoring, different angles. As he says, they're not preparing to leave power. They're preparing to suppress dissent. That's what it is. I agree with that. Lastly, like we ended with last time, guys, this is the current reality of where we are. The Pentagon deploys 350 troops, right, based on their rapid response setup to New Orleans. Why? Mardi Gras. Who knows? Maybe something will happen. Let's just put some troops on the ground just to be safe. That's not what Americans want. That's nobody other than the Nix order types were ever even demanding something. And even them, I don't think they really want that. I think that's what they think the team's supposed to do, so they do it. Are you actually conservatives out there claiming you want 350 National Guard deployed to Mardi Gras because maybe something will happen? In what world does that align with anything we've ever pretended we are? Time to speak up. It's just wild, man. But I do my best every time to bring you what I think is important. And we'll continue to do so. I think it's obvious. I think you see it. I think everybody sees it, quite frankly, to a degree. And I think right now, that's why their actions have become so clumsy. I said the same thing during COVID-19. And I think this point stands. I think it extends from this. There's something transitioning. There's actions being made. My point was during that, we said, look, why are they rushing? Why does it seem like they're at a timeline? Well, whether it's a 2030 point, which does overlap with both sides of the paradigm, or, there's some unseen endpoint. It's clear that there is something that they're aiming at, and whether we see it or not doesn't seem to really matter. They do their best to deflect and distract, but it's going, guys. It is happening. Now, as always, I could be wrong about everything. I could be missing something. Don't blindly take what I'm saying, but look at what I'm saying. consider the points I'm making. Look at the source material that I include. Every single thing that I show you is right below the video that you can verify, that you can cross-reference, that you can check the sources. I really don't even know other than people in the IMA that do that. And I shouldn't say it like that. There's plenty that aren't, that we should, as that grows, by the way, hopefully we'll get to expand. It's a group discussion. But the point being, them for sure, and a lot of other people that I could point to that we've talked to, but that's a small, there's the majority, mainstream alternative for sure, but a lot that just, for some reason, just choose not to include the links. I think it's because a lot of people somehow think that'll drive you away from them. I don't care whether you go look somewhere else or not. I want you to know the truth. It's not about me benefiting from giving you the truth. It's about you knowing the truth. And if you decide to support us because we do so, that's all the better. And we can't continue to do it without you. So that's up to you. But really think about that and understand where we are right now and how important it is to just be honest and straightforward and speak from the heart. Thank you for tuning in today. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.